Hey guys, welcome back to another journey through time, where we explore the forgotten corners of history in that soft, quiet way that helps you drift off to sleep. Tonight, we walk the path of the medieval archer, a figure often romanticized in our modern imagination as the heroic marksman, the skilled hunter, the noble warrior of folklore. But behind the legends lies a reality far more complex, far more demanding, far more brutal. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Settle deeper into your pillow. Perhaps pull your blanket just a little higher as we draw back the bowstring of history and loose an arrow into the past. The medieval archer's life was not one of glory and instant acclaim, but rather a journey of calloused hands, deformed fingers, and bodies physically transformed by their craft. A life where success was measured not in applause, but in survival, both their own and those they were sworn to protect. Each arrow they released carried with it years of training, countless hours of practice, generations of tradition. Their bodies were living weapons shaped by necessity and duty into instruments of both protection and destruction. What looks like a simple pull and release to our modern eyes was, in truth, a lifetime of dedication written into muscle and bone. As you feel the weight of the day releasing from your shoulders, I wonder, let me know in the comments what country and city you're watching from, and what time it is right now. Perhaps you're tucked away in some corner of the world I've never heard of. Your modern room illuminated by the blue glow of your screen instead of the flickering candlelight that would have guided a medieval archer to his humble bed after a day of grueling practice. Maybe you're in Tokyo at 3 a.m, or London as midnight approaches, or Los Angeles as the afternoon sun begins its descent. Each of you experiencing this same story, but from vastly different corners of our world. As we journey together through the life of these forgotten warriors, through their training, their struggles, their moments of both terror and quiet pride, consider how different your hands are from theirs. Your fingers, perhaps resting gently on your phone or tucked beneath your pillow, remain straight and supple. Theirs, permanently curved into a claw-like shape from decades of drawing bowstrings, told a different story. A story we'll explore together in these quiet hours. Only if this calms you, if these whispered histories help your mind settle into that peaceful state between wakefulness and dreams, consider subscribing to join our nightly journeys through time. There's no pressure, no obligation, just an invitation to continue wandering through history's shadows together, finding those overlooked stories that deserve to be remembered, even if only in our collective dreams. Now, take a deep breath as we step back, far back, into a world where strength was measured in pounds of draw weight, where childhood ended when your hands were strong enough to pull a bow, where your value might be determined by how quickly and accurately you could loose an arrow into the heart of an approaching enemy, a world both harsher and simpler than our own, where the difference between life and death might rest in the space between your fingers and the curve of a yew-wood bow. Let's go there now, together, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to drift like feathers on a gentle breeze. You wake in the dark, your fingers already calloused, your shoulders remembering yesterday's strain before your mind has fully surfaced from sleep. The straw mattress beneath you offers little comfort to bones that have grown accustomed to hardship. Outside, the village is still wrapped in that peculiar silence that comes just before dawn, a silence pregnant with anticipation, with duty, with the inevitability of the day to come. You are not yet 20 summers old, but your hands tell a different story. They belong to someone much older, someone who has drawn and released thousands upon thousands of arrows. The grooves in your fingers have become permanent fixtures, little valleys carved by years of pressing against hemp bowstrings. Your right hand, especially, bears the brunt of this transformation. 3 fingers, index, middle, and ring, curve slightly inward even when at rest, remembering their purpose even in stillness. The year is 1347. The place, a small village in northern England, where the morning mist rises from the fields like spirits leaving the earth. You are both common and extraordinary, a yeoman archer in service to the local lord, a position earned through skill rather than birth. Your father was an archer before you, and his father before him. The bow is your inheritance, your burden, your identity. As your bare feet meet the cool dirt floor, your body remembers its purpose before your mind fully awakens. Your left shoulder, the one that bears the brunt of the bow's resistance, aches with a familiar dullness. Your right shoulder, strengthened from thousands of draws, feels tight but capable. Your spine, slightly twisted from years of uneven exertion, protests quietly as you stand. This body of yours, not yet fully matured, has already been reshaped by your profession. The smell of wood smoke drifts through the single-room dwelling you share with your younger brother, also training in the bow, and your aging mother, who tends to what little home life you maintain. The aroma mingles with other scents: the pine tar used to treat bowstrings, the lanolin rubbed into leather braces, the peculiar metallic scent of arrowheads stored in the corner. These are the smells of your existence, as familiar as your own skin. You reach for your tunic, woven from rough wool that scratches against your skin. A constant minor irritation you ceased noticing years ago. Your braids are tied at the waist, and over them you pull woolen hose secured with simple garters. There is nothing fine about your clothing, nothing that speaks of wealth or status. These are the garments of functionality, of necessity, of someone whose value lies not in appearance but in skill. Outside, the eastern sky has begun its slow transformation from black to indigo. The roosters have yet to announce the new day, but your internal sense of time, honed through years of pre-dawn practice, tells you it's time to move. You take your bow from where it hangs on the wall, not the war bow, but the practice bow you use daily. 6 feet in length, crafted from a single stave of yew, it is an extension of your arm. A constant companion, more familiar than any human friend. The bow's weight feels right in your hand. The slight curve of the unstrung stave follows a line of beauty your eyes have learned to recognize instinctively. You know every inch of this weapon, the subtle variations in the grain, the perfect marriage of heartwood and sapwood, the small knot near the upper limb that required the bowyer's special attention. This is not merely a tool, it is a part of you. You step outside into the cool morning air. Your breath forms small clouds that dissipate quickly in the grey light. The village is beginning to stir. A dog barks in the distance, smoke rises from a neighbouring chimney. Someone coughs from within a nearby dwelling. But the practice field at the edge of the village will still be empty at this hour. You prefer it this way. The solitude of early morning practice has become a ritual, almost a form of devotion. The dew-covered grass soaks the hem of your tunic as you make your way toward the field. Your quiver, filled with 20 practice arrows, bounces lightly against your hip with each step. These arrows are old friends too, their shafts slightly worn, their fletchings repaired multiple times, their points dulled from countless impacts, against the practice butts. In war, you would use arrows only once, fired and forgotten, but in practice, every arrow is recovered, repaired, reused until it can serve no more. The practice field comes into view, bordered on one side by the dense forest that provides both protection and resources for your village. The butts, targets made from tightly compressed straw, stand at various distances, from 50 to 200 yards away. Beyond them, a gentle slope rises toward the Lord's manor, its stone walls catching the first hint of morning light while the village below remains in shadow. That division of light and dark seems an apt metaphor for the social order that defines your existence. You string your bow with practiced ease. a motion you could perform in total darkness if needed. The unstrung stave is bent, your knee providing the brace, and the hemp string is looped over the upper nock in one fluid motion. The transformation is immediate and profound, from a curved piece of wood to a weapon capable of delivering death. At 300 paces, the bow seems to come alive in your hands, its limbs now full of potential energy, waiting for your command to release their power. You select an arrow from your quiver, ashwood shaft, goose feather fletchings, simple iron tip. Its weight is so familiar that your fingers make tiny, unconscious adjustments as you knock it against the string. Your breathing changes automatically, slower, deeper, as your body prepares for the shot. Your stance shifts, left foot forward, body perpendicular to the target. Your left arm extends, holding the bow with a grip that is paradoxically both firm and relaxed. You draw the string back in one smooth motion, your right hand coming to rest against your cheek in the anchor position. The yew-bow flexes, its limbs, curving under the 100-pound pressure of your draw. There is resistance, always resistance, but your shoulders and back have been shaped by years of this precise motion. The muscles between your shoulder blades contract, bearing most of the weight as you hold the draw for one breath, 2 breaths, and then release. The arrow springs forward with a sound that is both subtle and significant, the whispered promise of violence. You watch its flight, the slight wobble as it leaves the bow, the perfect arc of its trajectory, the solid thud as it embeds itself in the straw butt 100 yards distant. There is satisfaction in this, a small moment of perfection in an imperfect world. But one perfect shot means nothing. You reach for another arrow without conscious thought, and another after that, and another. The rhythm becomes meditative. Draw, anchor, release, draw, anchor, release. Each repetition a prayer of sorts, an affirmation of your place in the world. By the time the sun finally crests the eastern horizon, painting the field in gold, you have loosed and retrieved your 20 arrows 3 times over. Your shoulder aches, your fingers burn, your back complains with each movement. But these discomforts are old companions, as much a part of your identity as your name. This is what it means to be an archer in medieval England, to accept that your body is an instrument honed for a singular purpose, that comfort is secondary to capability, that each day's practice is payment toward a debt that may be called due at any moment, on any battlefield. As others from the village begin to emerge from their homes, as the day's more mundane activities begin to take shape around you collect your arrows one final time. The day holds other duties. There is wood to be chopped, game to be hunted, perhaps service to be rendered to the Lord's estate. But this morning communion with your bow, this private ritual of discipline and skill, forms the core of who you are. You are an archer. Your body has been reshaped by this truth. Your future has been determined by it. And as you unstring your bow with the same care with which you strung it hours earlier, you accept this identity completely, without resentment or regret. In a world where most men have little choice in their destiny, you have at least been granted a skill that commands respect, that offers occasional moments of pride, that might, if fortune favors you, allow you to leave some small mark upon the world. The bow, now returned to its resting curve, feels lighter in your hand, but its presence remains with you, even when it hangs once more upon your wall, in the calluses on your fingers, in the uneven development of your shoulders, in the slight, permanent bend of your spine. You have become the bow, just as the bow has become you. 2 entities shaped by mutual purpose, by years of morning rituals, by the unyielding demands of a world where survival often depends on the space between a man's fingers and the curve of a yew-wood stave. Childhood. The word suggests Innocence, play, freedom from responsibility. But in your world, in this medieval England where every hand must contribute and every body must serve a purpose, childhood ends early, especially for those born to the bow. You remember your 7th birthday with unusual clarity, not because of any celebration. Such frivolities were rare in your family, but because it marked the day your father first placed a child's bow in your hands. The wood was smooth from years of use, passed down through generations of boys in your village. The string, made of hemp twisted by your grandfather's hands, felt rough against your small fingers. This was not a toy, despite your child's perception. It was an introduction to the person you would become. The king demands it, your father said simply, referring to laws that required all male subjects to practice archery from age 7, though many began earlier, and life demands it even more. There was no cruelty in his voice, just the steady certainty of a man who understood the world and his place within it. His own fingers, permanently curved from decades of drawing the bowstring, rested gently on your shoulder as he guided your first awkward attempts. The bow was light, suitable for a child's frame, but the discipline it required was heavy. While other children might steal moments to chase each other through the village or splash in the shallow stream that ran near the mill, your afternoons became measured in arrows, in distances, in the gradually decreasing size of your target. Play did not vanish entirely. It simply transformed, becoming purposeful, directed, always returning to the developing skill that would define your value. You remember the pain of those early years. Not just the physical discomfort, though there was plenty of that, from string slaps against your forearm that left welts and bruises, to the aching shoulders unused to the repetitive motion, but the deeper pain of witnessing your own transformation, the slow death of possibility as your path narrowed toward a single destination. Other boys might dream of becoming merchants or craftsmen, might imagine traveling to distant cities or even taking vows with the church, but for you, the decisions had been made generations before your birth. The seasons passed, marked not by holidays or celebrations, but by your growing strength, your increasing accuracy, your body's gradual adaptation to the bow's demands. By age 10, you could hit a target at 50 paces more often than not. By 12, your arrows grouped tightly at twice that distance. Your body was changing too, your right arm developing muscle and sinew at a pace that left your left arm struggling to catch up, your back broadening asymmetrically, your spine beginning the subtle curve that would become more pronounced with each passing year. Sundays after church became the most public display of your progress. All the village men and boys would gather at the butts, the practice targets, for mandatory training as required by royal decree. The priest would sometimes linger, watching the parishioners transition from prayer to practice, from contemplating heaven to preparing for earthly violence. You remember his face, the complicated mixture of approval and sorrow as he observed your growing skill. These Sunday gatherings had the superficial appearance of community recreation. Men laughed and wagered small amounts on each other's accuracy. Boys competed fiercely for recognition and approval. Some fathers guided their sons with patience and encouragement, others with harsh criticism and the occasional cuff to the ear for a poorly loosed arrow. But beneath the social veneer lay something more serious: preparation for war, cultivation of the martial skill that had secured England's safety and expanded its influence for generations. By your 14th year, you were using a bow nearly as tall as yourself, drawing weights that made adult men from other regions, men who worked the fields or tended animals or practiced trades, stare in disbelief. Your hands had begun their permanent transformation, calluses building upon calluses until your fingertips seemed armored against all sensation except the feel of the bowstring. The innermost joints of your drawing fingers had begun to alter, their alignment remaining slightly bent even when at rest. You remember the visiting nobleman who passed through your village that year, pausing to observe the Sunday practice. His eyes lingered on you, on the fluid motion of your draw, the perfect stillness of your release, the tight grouping of your arrows at a distance that made others squint to even see the target. Later, you overheard him speaking to your father. "The boy has the makings of a proper war archer," he said, his accent marking him as from the south, perhaps London itself. "When he's of age, I could find a place for him in a company preparing for France." Your father's response was measured, respectful, but not eager. "He'll serve when called, my lord, as his bloodline has done since before Hastings." That night, lying on your straw mattress, the significance of the exchange settled over you like a physical weight. Not just the recognition of your skill, though, that brought a small, warm glow of pride, but the reminder of your purpose. The bow was not ultimately meant for targets of straw and wood. It was meant for human bodies, for warfare, for the violent projection of England's power across land and sea. You had known this, of course, in the abstract way that all children know the adult world awaits them. But that night, the knowledge took on a new solidity. The arrow's path, which had seemed to arc through years of peaceful practice, suddenly extended beyond the horizon, toward battlefields you could not yet imagine. The following morning, you returned to practice with a different kind of attention. Each draw became more deliberate, each release more mindful. You began to see the bow not just as an extension of your body, but as an instrument that would carry your intentions into the world for better or worse. The responsibility of this settled into your young bones alongside the physical changes the bow had already wrought there. As your 15th year approached, your training intensified. No longer were you practicing only with the village boys or under your father's watchful eye. Now the older archers, veterans of campaigns in Scotland or along the contested Welsh borders, took interest in your development. They spoke little, these men with weathered faces and haunted eyes, but when they offered correction or demonstration, you watched with total absorption. "Keep your elbow higher," one might murmur, adjusting your drawing arm with hands that bore scars you couldn't begin to identify. "Feel the bow's resistance in your back, not your arm," another would instruct, pressing a gnarled finger between your shoulder blades. They never spoke of battles directly, these veterans, but occasionally, their guidance carried echoes of hard-won experience. "When it rains, the string stretches," an older archer told you once, his voice low as if sharing a grave secret. "Remember that when adjusting your aim." The simple observation contained volumes, implied experiences of combat in adverse conditions, of calculations made while enemies approached and lives depended on accuracy. You nodded solemnly, storing the knowledge away like treasure. By 16, you were no longer a boy being trained, but a young archer refining his craft. The childish games that had once been interspersed with practice had fallen away entirely. Even your dreams had changed, no longer filled with the fantastic creatures and impossible adventures of childhood, but with the flight of arrows, the tension of the bow, the satisfaction of perfect release. Your body had completed much of its transition into the archer's distinctive form. Your right shoulder and arm had developed significantly more muscle than your left. Your back had broadened asymmetrically. Your posture carried a slight permanent curve. Your hands appeared to belong to someone much older, with their pronounced calluses and finger joints that never fully straightened. You had become a living testament to your craft, your physical form shaped by its demands, as surely as a river shapes the stones over which it flows. And as childhood receded like the dim memory of a dream upon waking, you understood that what had begun as training was now simply who you were. The bow had ceased to be an object you picked up and became instead a presence that never truly left you, even when it rested against the wall of your dwelling. Its weight, its tension, its purpose had become internalized, written into muscle and bone, sinew and spirit. This transformation of play into purpose, of childhood into craft, happened so gradually that its completion arrived without ceremony. One day, You simply realized that you were no longer becoming an archer. You had become one. The bow's path had led you out of childhood into a different kind of existence, one defined by discipline, by physical capability, by readiness for violence in service to lord and kingdom. And in quiet moments, as you rubbed lanolin into your bowstring or carefully straightened a bent arrow shaft, you occasionally wondered about the paths not taken, the person you might have become had you been born to different circumstances, with different expectations. But these thoughts never lingered long. The bow demanded presence, attention, commitment, and you had given yourself to it completely, your childhood a necessary sacrifice to the archer you had become. There is a quiet irony in the creation of a weapon. Hands that craft with care produce an object designed for destruction. Patience and attention culminate in an instrument of sudden violence. Years of knowledge and tradition are poured into a tool whose purpose is fulfilled in the instant an arrow is loosed. You have come to appreciate this contradiction as you've grown in your understanding of the bow itself, not just as a weapon you wield, but as a masterpiece of craft, whose making requires art as profound as its use. The bowyer's workshop in your village is a place of reverence. You remember your first visit there clearly. Your father leading you by the hand, the smell of wood shavings filling the air, the dust dancing in slanted beams of sunlight through the single window. The old bowyer, hands gnarled like ancient, roots, but moving with surprising delicacy, looked up from his workbench and nodded solemnly at your approach. No words were exchanged, but a silent acknowledgement passed between the adults, another generation being introduced to the sacred relationship between archer and bowmaker. Watch carefully, your father instructed, and you did, your child's eyes wide as the bowyer demonstrated the assessment of a stave, running his hands along the grain, tapping to listen for sounds only his experienced ears could interpret, holding the unworked wood up to the light to examine its internal character. Even then, before you understood any of the technical aspects of bowmaking, you sensed the profound respect the craftsman held for his materials. Now, years later, as a practicing archer yourself, you understand that respect comes from knowing. The bow's creation is not a process that begins in the workshop. It begins in the forest, perhaps decades before the weapon takes shape. The yew tree, favoured above all others for longbows, must grow for at least 50 years before it can provide the perfect stave, and not just any yew will do. The ideal stave comes from the junction of a trunk and branch, where the wood has been naturally stressed and strengthened by the tree's growth pattern. England's appetite for warbows has depleted its native yew forests, so now the finest staves come from across the narrow sea, from Spain, Italy, or the Alpine regions. They arrive as cargo on merchant ships, carefully selected and transported across hundreds of miles, each one representing a significant investment before the bowyer's knife has made a single cut. You've heard the older archers complain of the expense, reminiscing about times when English yew was plentiful. But even they admit that the imported wood, grown slowly in continental soils, produces bows of superior power and durability. The harvested stave must then be seasoned, a process, not of hours or days, but of years. The wood is stored in dry conditions, sometimes wrapped to control the rate of moisture loss, turned regularly to ensure even drying. Patience is not merely a virtue in this process, it is an absolute requirement. A stave rushed from forest to workshop will produce a bow that twists, warps, or, worst of all, breaks at a crucial moment, perhaps costing an archer his life in battle. You've seen the racks in the bowyer's workshop where staves in various stages of seasoning wait for their transformation. Some have been there since before your birth, laid down by the bowyer's father or even grandfather, an investment in the community's future defence. This extreme foresight, this planning across generations, speaks to the seriousness with which your people view the bow's creation. It is not merely a weapon, it is a legacy, a continuation of tradition that stretches back to times beyond memory. When a stave is finally deemed ready for working, typically after 3 to 5 years of seasoning, the bowyer's art truly begins. The selection is not made lightly. Each stave is assessed again, its character more fully revealed by the seasoning process. Some will become hunting bows, others practice weapons. But the finest, those with perfect grain and ideal distribution of sapwood and heartwood, are destined to become war bows, the legendary English longbow capable of punching through armor at 200 paces. The crafting itself follows principles refined over centuries. The back of the bow, the part facing away from the archer when drawn, must come from the sapwood, the younger, more flexible outer layer of the tree. This portion stretches under tension when the bow is drawn. The belly of the bow, facing toward the archer, must come from the heartwood, the older, denser core that can withstand compression. This perfect marriage of tension and compression, of flexibility and resistance, is what gives the longbow its extraordinary power. The bowyer's tools are surprisingly simple: draw knives, scrapers, files, and small planes, but wielded with expertise developed over a lifetime. Wood is removed in careful stages, the bow taking shape gradually as the craftsman constantly assesses the developing curves, the balance between limbs, the tiller, that perfect arc that distributes stress evenly throughout the weapon's length. Too much wood removed means a weakened bow. Too little means a weapon too stiff for even the strongest archer to draw effectively. You've watched this process unfold numerous times, standing quietly in the corner of the workshop as the bowyer shaped the staves destined to become your own weapons. There is something almost meditative in observing the transformation, the straight stave slowly revealing the bow that was always hidden within it, waiting to be released by skilled hands. Like a sculptor revealing the figure already present in marble, the bowyer does not so much create the bow as discover it within the wood. The finished bow, standing as tall as a man or taller, your own war bow measures 6 feet 4 inches, retains the character of the living tree from which it came. Each weapon is unique, with subtle variations in grain, color, and flexibility that the skilled archer comes to know intimately. No two bows draw exactly the same way. No two make precisely the same sound when loosed. Each has its own voice, its own personality born from its origins and cultivation. And here lies another irony that you've come to appreciate. The bow, created from a living thing, takes on a kind of second life in the hands of its user. It breathes as you breathe, expands and contracts with temperature and humidity, ages and changes with use and care. The relationship between archer and bow is not that of user and tool, but of partners engaged in a dance of mutual adaptation. Your hands have grown calloused in specific patterns to accommodate your bow's demands. The bow's grip has subtly polished and darkened to record the exact placement of your hand. The nocks at either end of the bow, carefully reinforced with horn to prevent splitting, bear the tiny impressions of thousands of string attachments. The limbs have developed their own memory, returning after each shot to a rest position slightly different from their original shape. Even the color has evolved, darkened by the oils from your skin, by exposure to sun and rain on campaign, by the smoke of countless campfires. Your bow carries the history of your relationship written in these small changes, these adaptations to shared purpose. Most profound of all is the bow's mortality. Despite all the care in selection, all the skill in crafting, all the attention in maintenance, every bow has a finite lifespan. Some break suddenly in moments of extreme stress. Others deteriorate gradually, losing power and accuracy until they must be retired from war use to serve in hunting or training. You've seen veteran archers mourn the loss of a favored bow with greater emotion than they've shown for fallen comrades. A vulnerability exposed only in that moment of separation from a weapon that had become an extension of themselves. This awareness of the bow's limited life drives the constant cycle of creation. Even now, in the bowyer's workshop, staves are being seasoned for weapons you might carry a decade from now. The tree that will provide your final warbow. The one that might accompany you to your death on some distant battlefield, may not yet even be planted. This continuity, this overlapping of lifespans, tree to stave to bow to archer, generation after generation, creates a sense of perspective that few other crafts can match. When you take up your bow each morning, feeling its familiar weight and tension, you are holding more than a weapon. You are holding centuries of accumulated knowledge, generations of careful selection and craft, years of patient seasoning and shaping. The bow connects you to this lineage of creation even as it prepares you for destruction. It reminds you that even in war, perhaps especially in war, humans create with as much care as they destroy. And as your fingers find their familiar position on the string, as your bones and muscles engage in the dance they have rehearsed thousands of times, you carry forward this tradition, not just of archery, but of the profound relationship between craftsman, material, and wielder. The yew tree's death enables the bow's creation. The bow's creation enables your survival. Your survival ensures the tradition continues, a circle unbroken since long before your birth and continuing long after your death. This is the weight you bear each time you draw the string. Not just the 100 pounds of physical resistance, but the responsibility of carrying forward this ancient craft, this accumulated wisdom, this deadly art that has shaped your body, just as surely as the bowyer's knife shaped the yew stave. And in quiet moments of perfect release, when the arrow flies true and the bow vibrates in harmony with your intention, there is a completion of purpose that transcends the weapon's destructive end. There is, paradoxically, creation in that perfect moment, creation of an action that could not exist without the marriage of tree, craft, and human will. To the untrained eye, a longbow appears deceptively simple, a curved piece of wood with a string attached at both ends. This apparent simplicity belies the weapon's true nature, a precisely engineered instrument whose every dimension, every curve, every proportion has been refined over centuries to create the perfect balance between power and usability. As you've grown into your role as an archer, you've come to understand your bow not just as a weapon, but as an extension of yourself, a physical presence so constant that the boundary between tool and user has blurred to near invisibility. Your warbow stands taller than you do, 6 feet and 4 inches of yew, its back a pale cream colour from the sapwood, its belly a rich amber from the heartwood. When unstrung, it curves gently away from you, its natural state of rest. When strung, it curves subtly toward you, loaded with potential energy like a spring, held in constant tension. This pre-tensioning allows the bow to store more energy when drawn, giving it the devastating power that has made English longbowmen feared throughout Europe. The dimensions of your bow follow proportions established through generations of trial and error, and its grip, the central section where your left hand clasps the weapon. The bow measures 1.25 inches in width and 1.5 inches in depth. This thickness gradually diminishes toward the tips, creating limbs that taper with perfect symmetry to accommodate the horn nocks at either end. This tapering is not uniform, but follows a precise rate of change calculated to distribute stress evenly throughout the bow's length when drawn. Unlike the shorter, more reflexed bows used by mounted archers from the East, the English longbow derives its power not from complex curves, but from sheer length and the quality of its materials. Its design is known as a self-bow, crafted from a single piece of wood rather than laminated from multiple materials. This simplicity of construction belies its effectiveness. The longbow's length, typically matched to the height of its user, plus several inches, allows for a longer power stroke, the distance over which the string accelerates the arrow. You know intimately the draw weight of your warbow, the amount of force required to pull the string to full draw. At 120 pounds, it exceeds what most modern men could manage even once, let alone repeatedly throughout a day's battle. This extraordinary weight is not a matter of bravado or excess, but of necessity, to penetrate the increasingly sophisticated armour of the 14th century, to maintain lethal force at distances of up to 250 yards, to create the famous arrow storm that has broken enemy formations and turned the tide of battles. This power is essential. The bowstring itself deserves consideration, equal to the stave. Made from hemp fibres twisted with meticulous care, waxed for water resistance and durability, it must withstand forces that would snap inferior materials instantly. You replace your string regularly, before campaign seasons, before major battles, any time you observe fraying or wear. A broken string in practice means embarrassment. A broken string in battle often means death. The string's thickness, too, is precisely calculated. Too thin, and it might break under the bow's power. Too thick, and it reduces the energy transferred to the arrow. The knocking point on your string, the exact location where you place the arrow, is marked by a small brass ring wrapped with thread, positioned to ensure that the arrow sits perpendicular to the string when drawn. This seemingly minor detail can mean the difference between an arrow that flies true and one that veers off course. Like everything else about the longbow, this placement is not arbitrary, but determined through careful observation and adjustment. Over thousands of shots, what truly distinguishes the war archer, though, is not merely understanding the bow's physical properties, but experiencing its effects on your own body. The asymmetrical development caused by years of archery practice is unmistakable to anyone who looks closely. Your right arm, your drawing arm, has developed thick bands of muscle from wrist to shoulder. Your left arm, while strong from supporting the bow's weight, appears almost diminutive in comparison. Your back muscles have developed unevenly as well, with the right side substantially more built up than the left. Most telling of all are the changes to your skeletal structure, adaptations that would be immediately apparent to any physician who examined your bones after death. The archer's skeleton tells its own story. Enlarged left arm bones to withstand the bow's pressure, compressed spine from years of absorbing the shocks of release, right shoulder blade morphed by the repetitive motion of drawing, finger bones permanently altered by the pressure of the string. These changes are so distinctive that archaeologists centuries later will be able to identify the remains of English war archers based solely on these skeletal adaptations. You've seen these changes in the older archers, men in their 40s and 50s whose bodies have been warped by decades of service to the bow. Their right arms swing differently when they walk, perpetually ready to draw. Their spines twist visibly beneath their tunics. Their fingers never fully straighten, remaining curved like talons even at rest. These physical transformations are not viewed as deformities, but as marks of identity, of belonging to the ancient brotherhood of the bow. The most sobering evidence of the longbow's physical demands comes from the skeletal remains of archers recovered from the Mary Rose, King Henry's warship that sank in the 16th century. Though that disaster lies 2 centuries in your future, the bodies of those men tell the same story your body is writing now. Bones thickened from stress, joints enlarged from repetitive motion, spines twisted from years of uneven exertion. Those sailors were not exceptional. They were simply men who, like you, surrendered their physical development to the bow's unyielding requirements. When you take up your war bow, feeling its substantial weight in your left hand, you are acutely aware of it as both burden and privilege. The enormous power it contains, the ability to kill at distances that seemed magical to previous generations, comes at the cost of your body's natural development. You have, in a very real sense, been bent to the bow's purpose, just as the yew stave was bent to the bowyer's. The difference is that the stave was shaped over months. Your body has been and continues to be reshaped over decades. And yet, there is pride in this transformation. When you stand with other archers, you recognize in their posture, their movement, their very silhouette, the same changes evident in your own body. There is a silent brotherhood in this shared sacrifice, this mutual adaptation to the weapon that defines your worth and purpose. In a world stratified by birth and wealth, the physical marks of the archer create their own social identity. Not noble, certainly, but respected, necessary, set apart. The irony is not lost on you that the yew stave must be perfectly straight and free from flaws to become a bow, while the human who wields it must accept permanent asymmetry and physical alteration. The bow remains beautiful in its deadly purpose. The archer becomes twisted in service to that beauty. It is a trade that generations before you have made willingly, and generations after will continue to make, as long as the longbow remains, the supremely effective weapon it has proven to be. As you run your hand along your bow's smooth length, feeling the perfect balance between heartwood and sapwood, between flexibility and strength, you understand that you and your weapon have grown together, shaped each other, created between you something that neither could achieve alone. The bow, without an archer, is merely potential. The archer, without a bow, is merely intention. Together, you become something feared on battlefields across Europe. The English longbowman, capable of loosing 10 aimed arrows per minute, each, carrying enough force to penetrate plate armor at 200 yards. This intimate connection between archer and bow transcends mere utility. It approaches something spiritual, a relationship forged through thousands of hours of practice, maintained through careful attention to every detail of the weapon's care, and expressed most perfectly in that moment of release when bow, arrow, and archer function as a single entity. The bow has shaped your body. Your will has given the bow purpose. Neither exists in its current form without the other. And so, as you take your position on the practice field each morning, the familiar weight of the bow in your hand feels not like a burden, but like a homecoming. The weapon that has bent your spine, thickened your bones, and permanently curved your fingers has also given you identity, purpose, and a place in the world. The price of this belonging is written in your flesh, but it is a price paid willingly, arrow by arrow, day by day, year by year, until the bow's shape becomes indistinguishable from your own. Repetition creates both mastery and suffering. This truth becomes evident in the life of an archer more than perhaps any other profession. The daily training that shapes your skill is simultaneously the force that reshapes your body, that calluses your mind against discomfort, that transforms the extraordinary into the routine. Archery is not merely something you do, it is a practice that consumes you hour by hour, day by day, season by season, until the line between training and existing begins to blur. Your day begins before dawn, as it always has. The first arrows are loosed in that grey liminal space when night is not quite finished, but day has not yet fully claimed the sky. There is practice wisdom in this timing. Your eyes learn to function in low light, a skill that may someday prove valuable on morning battlefields or evening skirmishes. But there is practical wisdom too. These quiet hours before the village fully wakes allow for focus without interruption, for communion with the bow before the day's other duties intrude. You begin with stretching, not the formal, named exercises that warriors in distant lands might practice, but the intuitive loosening of muscles that your body has learned to need. Your right shoulder rotates slowly, warming the complex network of tissues that will soon bear the bow's full draw weight. Your fingers flex and extend, preparing for the strain they will endure. Your back, already bearing the slight permanent curve of the archer's spine, lengthens and contracts in preparation for the hundreds of repetitive motions to come. The first arrows of the day are shot at close range, no more than 30 yards. This is not to build accuracy, which comes later, but to establish rhythm, to remind muscles of their purpose, to ease the body into its work, rather than shocking it with immediate maximum exertion. These early shots are like conversations between you and your bow, re-establishing the relationship after the night's separation. How does the you feel today? Has humidity affected its flexibility? Has the string stretched slightly since yesterday's practice? These questions are answered not in words, but in the feel of each draw, each release, each arrow's flight. As full daylight emerges, you move to greater distances, 50 yards, 100, 200. The mechanics of your draw remain identical. Regardless of range, this consistency is the foundation of accuracy, but your mind makes tiny, almost unconscious adjustments to compensate for distance. The arrow must be loosed at a slightly higher angle for greater ranges, must account for wind that might be negligible at closer distances but significant over 200 yards. These calculations become instinctive with practice, your brain processing variables of physics without requiring conscious thought. You work through your quiver methodically, 20 arrows shot, retrieved, inspected for damage, shot again. The rhythm becomes meditative. Draw, anchor, release, follow through, walk to the target, extract arrows, return to position, begin again. There is a strange comfort in this circularity, this returning always to the same beginning, the same motion, the same purpose. While others might find such repetition maddening, you have learned to find peace within it, a narrowing of focus that excludes the world's complexities in favor of this one perfect repeated action. The physical toll accumulates gradually. By mid-morning, your shoulder begins to burn with the familiar deep ache that no amount of training ever fully eliminates. Your fingers, despite years of callousing, feel the strings bite more acutely with each successive draw. The small muscles between your shoulder blades, the ones that bear the majority of the bow's resistance, begin to tremble slightly with fatigue. These discomforts are not failures, but measurements, gauges of effort that you have learned to read as clearly as any craftsman reads the tools of his trade. You practice in all weather. This is not a choice, but a necessity. Rain loosens bowstrings and adds weight to arrows. You must learn to compensate. Wind pushes arrows off course in patterns that must become familiar through experience. Snow and cold make fingers stiff and less sensitive. This too must be overcome through practice. The elements are not inconveniences to be avoided, but variables to be mastered. For when battle comes, it does not wait for fair weather or ideal conditions. The arrow itself becomes an extension of your intention, a physical manifestation of will that connects you to distant targets. Each has its own minor variations in weight, in spine flexibility, in the precise angle of its fletchings. A lesser archer might blame these variations for missed shots. You have learned through thousands of repetitions to feel these differences as the arrow leaves your fingers, to develop an intuitive understanding of how each individual projectile will fly. This sensitivity, this conversation between archer, bow, and arrow, separates the warbowman from the casual hunter. By midday, when the village is fully engaged in its collective labor, you have already loosed more than 100 arrows. Your right arm feels heavier, your back tighter, your focus slightly narrowed by fatigue. This is when the most important training begins. Not when you are fresh and strong, but when weakness begins to creep into muscle and attention. Battle does not allow for rest when tired. Neither does your practice. The ability to maintain accuracy and power when exhaustion sets in is what distinguishes the dedicated archer from the merely competent. Afternoons bring different forms of practice. Sometimes you work on speed, the ability to knock, draw, aim, and loose as quickly as possible without sacrificing accuracy. A skilled war archer can release 10 to 12 arrows per minute, creating the famous arrow storm that has decided battles and broken cavalry charges. This pace means an arrow must leave your bow every 5 to 6 seconds, a rhythm that requires arrows to be held at the ready in the left hand, nocked and drawn in one fluid motion, released with minimal aiming time. Other afternoons focus on shooting from different positions, kneeling, from behind makeshift barriers while moving backward. Battle rarely allows for the perfect stance practiced on serene training fields. You must be able to maintain accuracy while adapted to terrain, to obstacles, to the chaos of combat. These variations are not mere diversions, but essential expansions of skill that might someday mean the difference between life and death. There is science in what you do, though you would never use such a term. The archer's paradox, that strange phenomenon where an arrow must bend around the bow to fly straight, is something you understand not through mathematics or physics, but through observation and feel. You know that the arrow flexes when released, oscillating in a way that should send it off course, but instead allows it to compensate for the bow's presence in its path. This knowledge comes not from books or theories, but from watching thousands of arrow flights, from the intimate familiarity with your equipment that only endless repetition can provide. As evening approaches, you return to closer targets. The day's final arrows are shot with tired muscles, with fingers that have loosened and retrieved bowstrings hundreds of times since dawn. These last shots are perhaps the most important. They build the endurance, the muscle memory, the ingrained capability to function effectively, even at the limits of physical capacity. They remind your body that accuracy is not a luxury for times of rest and ideal conditions, but a requirement that must be maintained regardless of fatigue or circumstance. The devotion required by this regimen is absolute. While other craftsmen or labourers might find respite in taverns after their day's work, the serious archer knows that alcohol dulls the senses and weakens the following day's practice. While others might seek the comfort of soft beds, you sleep on firmer surfaces to maintain the back alignment necessary for consistent shooting. Even your diet is governed by the bow's demands. More protein to build and maintain the specialized muscles, particularly in the back and shoulders, that common work does not develop. This training is not merely physical, but mental as well. The archer develops a particular relationship with time and distance, with cause and effect. When you release an arrow at a target 200 yards distant, you must wait a full 2 seconds before impact, a prolonged interval in which your action has entered the world but not yet reached its conclusion. This teaches a peculiar patience, an acceptance that once your part is done, factors beyond your control determine the ultimate outcome. It is a lesson with applications far beyond archery, a philosophy built into muscle and bone through daily practice. As darkness falls and you unstring your bow for the night, your body bears the accumulated fatigue of 1,000 repetitions. Your fingers ache with a depth that reaches to bone. Your shoulder throbs with each heartbeat. The small muscles between your shoulder blades feel as though they've been carved from wood rather than flesh. These discomforts are not the enemy, but the evidence, proof of dedication, of discipline, of the slow, incremental improvement that comes only through relentless practice. You clean your bow carefully before hanging it for the night, wiping down the stave with a cloth lightly treated with beeswax, checking the string for fraying or wear, inspecting the nocks for any signs of stress or damage. This ritual is both practical maintenance and an act of reverence, an acknowledgement of the bow's central role in your life. As you tend to your weapon, your mind already anticipates tomorrow's dawn, the next day's practice, the continuing cycle of repetition that shapes both skill and identity. The tally of arrows shot today exceeds 300, a number that would astonish those unfamiliar with the longbow's demands, but that represents an average day for a dedicated war archer. Multiply this by days, by seasons, by years, and the scale of devotion becomes clear. By the time you reach your 30th year, you will have shot more than 1 million arrows in practice alone, each one contributing minutely to the reshaping of your body, to the refinement of your skill, to the definition of who you are. And as you settle onto your sleeping pallet, body aching, but spirit centered in purpose, you understand that tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same repetitions, the same gradual accumulation of mastery through endless practice. The cycle might appear monotonous to outsiders, but you have found within its rhythm a kind of freedom, the liberation that comes from perfect alignment between body, tool, and purpose. In a world often chaotic and unpredictable, the daily regimen of the archer offers something rare: clarity, focus, and the tangible evidence of improvement earned through disciplined effort. The arrow exists in perfect balance between beauty and deadliness. While the bow commands immediate respect for its size and power, the arrow's lethal elegance is easier to overlook. Yet for the war archer, understanding the arrow, its creation, its flight, its purpose, is as essential as knowing the bow itself. The fletcher's craft may be less visible than the bowyer's, conducted in smaller spaces with more delicate tools, but its importance cannot be overstated. For what use is the most powerful bow without the perfect arrow to carry its force to target? The village fletcher works in a small workshop attached to his dwelling, a space filled with the distinctive aromas of his craft, the sharp scent of fresh wood shavings, the earthy smell of feathers, the metallic tang of iron points, the warm fragrance of the hide glue that binds the components together. Like the bowyer, the fletcher is both craftsman and artist, creating instruments that balance technical requirements with an almost spiritual appreciation for flight, for the arrow's brief but crucial journey from bow to target. You have spent many hours in this workshop, not just collecting finished arrows but observing their creation, understanding the variables that affect their performance. The fletcher welcomes your interest, unlike some craftsmen who guard their techniques as closely held secrets. Perhaps this openness comes from knowing that an archer who understands his arrows will use them more effectively, will care for them more diligently, will appreciate their quality more fully, or perhaps it simply reflects the interdependence of your roles. The fletcher's craft, meaningless without the archer powerless without the fletcher. The arrow begins as a straight shaft, traditionally fashioned from ash, poplar, or birch, woods chosen for their combination of strength, straightness, and appropriate weight. Each species offers slightly different characteristics. Ash provides durability and penetrating power for war arrows. Birch offers lighter weight for hunting small game. Poplar strikes a balance suitable for training. The best shafts come from trees grown in specific conditions, not too quickly, which creates weak wood, nor too slowly, which produces overly dense and heavy material. Selection of proper shafts is the fletcher's first and perhaps most crucial skill. He examines each potential stave carefully, looking for straight grain, proper diameter, and absence of knots or irregularities that might affect flight. From a bundle of wooden blanks, perhaps only 1 in 4 will meet his exacting standards. The rejected pieces are not wasted. They become practice arrows, hunting arrows for small game, or are repurposed for other woodworking needs. But for war arrows, only perfect shafts will suffice. The chosen staves are cut to length, between 27 and 32 inches, depending on the archer's draw length and the arrow's intended purpose. Longer arrows provide greater range, but require more material and may flex too much if not properly spined, a term referring to the shaft's stiffness. Shorter arrows travel faster, but may not reach the necessary distances for battlefield effectiveness. Your own war arrows measure 30 inches precisely, matched to your draw length and the specific characteristics of your bow. Once cut, the shafts must be seasoned, not for years like bow staves, but for weeks or months, depending on the wood type and initial moisture content. The drying must be controlled carefully to prevent warping or cracking. The fletcher arranges his selected shafts in specially designed racks, turning them regularly to ensure even drying, monitoring them with the attentiveness of a physician checking patients. This patience in the initial stages prevents disappointment and wasted effort later in the process. After seasoning comes the critical process of spine matching. Each shaft must be tested for its flexibility, its tendency to bend under pressure, and grouped with others of similar characteristics. An arrow that is too flexible for the bow's power will flex excessively when shot, causing erratic flight. One too stiff will not flex enough to compensate for the archer's paradox, again resulting in inaccuracy. The fletcher tests each shaft by applying standardized pressure and measuring the deflection, sorting the results into groups that will eventually become matched sets. Only after this sorting can the actual shaping begin. The shafts are planed and sanded to precise diameter, tapering slightly from knock end to point. This tapering serves both physical and aerodynamic purposes, balancing the arrow's weight distribution while reducing air resistance during flight. The surface is sanded to remarkable smoothness, removing any imperfections that might create drag or catch on the bow or archer's hand during release. What begins as a simple wooden cylinder becomes a precision instrument, its dimensions controlled to tolerances measured in fractions of an inch. The nock, the slotted end that receives the bowstring, is cut next, its width and depth precisely matched to the string's diameter. Too narrow, and the arrow may bind on release, affecting accuracy. Too wide, and it may slip from the string prematurely or fit too loosely for consistent shooting. The nock must also align perfectly with the grain of the wood to prevent splitting, under the tremendous pressure applied during draw and release. Some fletchers reinforce this area with thread windings, or even thin strips of horn for war arrows expected to endure harsh conditions. The opposite end of the shaft receives a socket to accept the arrowhead or point. For war arrows, this typically means a socket for the distinctive bodkin point, a narrow, square-section spike designed specifically to punch through mail armor or penetrate the gaps in plate. The socket is carved with minute precision, its diameter and depth calculated to create a secure fit when the metal head is inserted and secured with hide glue and sometimes a small pin. The alignment must be perfect. Any deviation means the arrow's point of impact will not match its point of aim. With the shaft prepared at both ends, the fletcher turns to what many consider the most delicate and artistic aspect of arrow making: the fletchings. These are not simply feathers attached to wood, but carefully selected, precisely trimmed stabilizers that transform a simple projectile into a marvel of aerodynamic engineering. And not just any feathers will do. Traditionally, only the primary. Wing feathers of the goose provide the right combination of stiffness, weight, and durability. More specifically, all feathers on a single arrow must come from the same wing of the same bird, right wing or left wing, but never mixed, because feathers naturally curve in directions specific to their origin. Mixing feathers from different wings creates unpredictable flight patterns as the arrow rotates. The best fletchers maintain careful inventories of feathers, sorted by wing, by position on the wing, and by the individual birds from which they came. Your war arrows carry feathers from grey geese, slightly heavier and more durable than the white goose feathers used for hunting or target arrows. The feathers are split lengthwise, their central quills shaved down to almost nothing, reducing weight while preserving the aerodynamic surface. Each is cut to precise length and height, typically 3 inches long and ½ inch high for war arrows, though these dimensions vary based on the arrow's intended purpose. Lower profiles create less drag and greater speed. Higher profiles provide more stabilization for greater accuracy. War arrows balance these competing needs, sacrificing some accuracy for the penetrating power that comes with speed. Attachment of the fletchings requires the steadiest hand and the greatest patience. Each feather must be positioned at exactly the same distance from the nock, spaced at perfect 120-degree intervals around the shaft. The traditional 3-feather pattern allows one feather, the cock feather, to point away from the bow when nocked, preventing contact with the bow that would deflect the arrow's flight. The feathers are secured with hide glue and typically bound at both ends with fine thread, sometimes dyed in colors that identify a particular archer's arrows in the chaos of battle. The completed arrow represents a remarkable symbiosis of natural materials: wood, feather, horn, sinew, glue, combined with human ingenuity to create something that transcends its components. A well-crafted war arrow can fly accurately over 200 yards, punch through mail armor, remain stable in crosswinds, and do so with a consistency that transforms the bow from a merely powerful weapon to a precision instrument of war. For you as an archer, each arrow is both expendable and precious. In battle, you will loose them by the dozens, few ever to be recovered. In practice, you collect each one, inspect it for damage, repair what can be salvaged, discard what cannot. The 24 arrows in your war quiver represent not just the Fletcher's craft, but your livelihood, your effectiveness, potentially your survival. You know each one individually. The slight variations in weight, in spine, in the pattern of feathers. In the instant between knocking and releasing, these intimate details inform tiny adjustments in your grip, your aim, your release point. And when an arrow leaves your bow, accelerating from rest to over 150 miles per hour, in the fraction of a second that the string propels it forward, it carries with it not just the power of the bow and the skill of your release, but the accumulated knowledge of generations of Fletchers, the careful selection of materials, the patient craftsmanship that transforms simple components into a projectile of lethal beauty. The arrow's journey, covering the distance to target in mere seconds, represents the culmination of a much longer journey from forest to workshop, to quiver to bow. In that brief flight lies the proof of human skill, of craft elevated to art, of deadly purpose achieved through perfect form. The world shrinks to the rhythm of footsteps when armies move. Your boots, simple leather affairs with thin soles, press into muddy tracks left by thousands before you. You are one of many now, a droplet in a river of humanity flowing across the countryside, bound for conflict in a distant land. The morning mist clings to the rolling hills as you adjust the weight of your bow secured across your back with a simple cord. Though it weighs only a few pounds after miles of marching, it feels as though you carry the weight of an oak tree upon your shoulders. Beside the bow, your quiver holds 24 arrows, their fletchings occasionally brushing against your ear. When you turn your head too quickly, a whispered reminder of your purpose in this procession. You carry more than weapons. A small pack contains your worldly possessions, a wooden bowl and spoon, a woolen blanket that smells of home, perhaps a talisman blessed by the village priest. Some archers carry a small knife for whittling replacement arrow shafts should supplies run low. Others bring whetstones to maintain the edge of their arrowheads. Every ounce matters when you might walk 20 miles before sunset. The English armies of the 100 Years' War would often march from coastal landing points deep into French territory, covering hundreds of miles over weeks or months. Supply. Wagons trundled behind, never quite carrying enough food to satisfy the hunger that became your constant companion. In your dreams, you still taste fresh bread from your mother's oven, but awake to hard biscuits and salted meat that makes your tongue cry out for a sip of ale. Archers often walked at the vanguard of these marching columns, their keen eyes scanning, horizons for threats. Though valued for your skill, you are still expendable enough to serve as early warning should ambush come. The contradiction of your position settles into your bones alongside the fatigue. Valued yet vulnerable, skilled yet subservient. Around you walk men from villages scattered across England and Wales. Accents blend into a curious tapestry of sound as stories are exchanged to pass the endless miles. A grizzled archer from Yorkshire describes the French castle he helped sack a decade prior. A young Fletcher from Cornwall speaks nervously of his first campaign. Fingers still bandaged from bowstring cuts, their voices become as familiar as family. "Save your breath for walking," calls a sergeant, himself a veteran of 3 campaigns. His face, weathered like old leather, bears a scar from an arrow that found its mark years ago. Such men command respect through survival alone. This strange fellowship forms with surprising speed. Men who would have been strangers or even rivals at village contests now share fire, food, and fears beneath foreign stars. You learn to recognize each other by silhouette alone, this one with the slight limp, that one with shoulders permanently hunched from years at the bow. When rain falls, you huddle together beneath makeshift shelters, listening to its rhythm on stretched cloaks, wondering if the French archers do the same miles away. The disciplined rows of marching gradually dissolve as the day lengthens. Blisters form, then burst, then bleed. Men fall behind, urged forward by mounted sergeants who understand that stragglers might never rejoin the column. The dust of summer roads coats throats already parched from too little water. In winter campaigns, mud claims boots with hungry persistence, each step becoming a battle of will against nature itself. Knights and men-at-arms occasionally trot past on horseback, the contrast between their relative comfort and your trudging, progress a reminder of the world's order. Yet there exists an unspoken understanding. When battle comes, they will need you and your humble you bow. This knowledge straightens spines even as feet develop painful calluses beneath them. Villages appear on the horizon, then grow close, then fall behind. Local peasants watch your passage with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Sometimes they offer food or drink. Other times they hide what little they have, aware that even allied armies can strip a region bare as locusts. You wonder if your own village would do the same, should foreign soldiers appear on the road one morning. At day's end, the order comes to make camp. Bodies that moved mechanically all day now bend to new tasks, gathering firewood, digging shallow, fire pits, establishing perimeters. Fingers that will tomorrow need precision now fumble with tent stakes and cooking pots. The smell of 100 small fires mingles with sweat and leather, and the distant scent of forests that remind some men of home. Around these fires, bonds deepen. The archer's place in the social hierarchy of medieval warfare becomes clear. Above, common foot soldiers, but well below mounted men-at-arms and knights. Yet among yourselves exists another hierarchy based not on birth, but skill. The archer who can consistently hit a target at 200 paces commands respect regardless of his father's station. Merit mingles with tradition in this microcosm of medieval society. Sleep comes quickly, despite hard ground beneath you. Dreams blend memories of home with anxieties about battles yet fought. In these dreams, arrows fly with perfect accuracy, never missing their marks. If only waking combat was so certain. Dawn arrives with horns signaling another day of march. Bodies rise slowly, stiffness claiming joints that yesterday covered 15 miles. You check your bowstring, ensuring night dampness hasn't weakened its crucial fibers. The routine brings comfort. Inspect, adjust, secure. Control what little you can in this journey toward uncertainty. As days pass, rumors begin to filter back through the column. The enemy has been sighted. They outnumber us. They have hired Genoese crossbowmen. They have positioned themselves on high ground. Each whisper carries a seed of truth, wrapped in layers of exaggeration and fear. Sergeants work to maintain discipline, as the atmosphere gradually shifts from the monotony of march to the electric anticipation of coming violence. The night before, battle holds a peculiar quality. Conversations grow quieter, more meaningful. Men who boasted loudly days earlier now speak in hushed tones. Some write letters home, entrusting them to companions should they fall. Others silently examine their weapons or stare into campfires, as if searching for prophecies in the dancing flames. A priest moves among the men, offering blessings and collecting final confessions. Even those who rarely attended church in peacetime now bow their heads, aware of mortality's imminent presence. Sleep proves elusive on this final night. Your mind replays training exercises, imagines the field you've yet to see, considers possibilities too numerous to count. When you do drift into unconsciousness, it's shallow and broken by the smallest sounds. A horse whinnying in the distance, the changing of guards, the whispered prayers of the man lying beside you. Morning arrives with a different atmosphere. There is purpose now, an end to the marching that has consumed days or weeks. Commanders move with deliberate steps, conferring in small groups, pointing to horizons. Orders cascade down through sergeants to the ranks of waiting men. Archers are instructed to check every arrow, every string. Nothing can be left to chance now. You rise as part of something larger than yourself, a war machine assembled from flesh, bone, and you. The weight of history settles alongside the familiar weight of your bow. Ancestors who stood in similar formations at Crécy and Poitiers seem to march beside you now, ghostly companions offering silent encouragement as you move toward the ridge, where you will finally stop marching and begin the work you were trained since childhood to perform. The battlefield awaits, your body tense with anticipation, your mind surprisingly calm now that the waiting nears its end. One foot before the other, one last march before the world narrows to the simple, terrible geometry of arrow, bow, and distant target. Time changes its nature on the battlefield. Moments stretch into eternities. Hours compress into heartbeats. As you stand in formation, shoulder to shoulder with fellow archers, the morning mist slowly revealing an opposing army across a muddy field, your senses sharpen to an almost painful clarity. The battlefield has its own geography, invisible to those who have never stood upon its contested ground. You occupy the slight rise to the right flank, where commanders have positioned archers to maximize the deadly rain you'll soon unleash. The placement seems almost ritualistic. English longbowmen typically arranged on the wings like the arms of a deadly embrace, or sometimes in a wedge formation projecting forward from the main line. Protective stakes have been hammered into the earth before your position, angled outward like wooden teeth to discourage cavalry charges. Your hands helped drive these simple defenses into the reluctant soil hours earlier, each impact of mallet against wood, a meditation on survival. Now they stand as the thin line between order and chaos, life and death. The waiting carries its own unique torment. Your body, trained through countless hours of practice, knows what must be done, yet quivers with a mixture of fear and readiness. Nearby, a younger archer whispers prayers between dry lips. An older man stares silently ahead, having seen this tableau before at Calais or Poitiers. You wonder if survival brings wisdom or merely calluses to the soul as well as the fingers. Commanders move along the line on horseback, their voices carrying instructions that ripple through the formations. Wait for the command. Aim for the mass, not the man. Conserve arrows until they're within range. These tactical fragments settle into your consciousness alongside the prayers and curses that form the strange liturgy of pre-battle moments. Your quiver holds 24 arrows, each representing a life potentially ended or spared. Some archers carry their arrows point down in the quiver to protect the delicate fletchings. Others point up for faster retrieval. Each has developed his own system through experience or superstition. You touch the fletching of one arrow, goose feathers, carefully split and attached with glue made from boiled fish bladder, a detail of craftsmanship soon to be lost in mud and blood. Across the field, movement begins. Standards rise and fall in silent signals. Mounted knights adjust positions, their armor catching occasional glints of sunlight through breaking clouds. You notice everything with unnatural sharpness. The red and white checked surcoat of a distant commander, the darker mass of infantry shifting position, the crossbowmen being moved forward in their own deadly formation. A horn sounds. Not yours, theirs. The sound carries across the field with bizarre clarity, as though all other noise has been temporarily suspended. In response, Drums begin a steady rhythm from somewhere behind your position. The heartbeat of battle commences, and thousands of human hearts adjust to match its tempo. "Ready," comes the call from your sergeant, a man whose voice has become as familiar as family through weeks of march. No one moves yet, but every muscle prepares. Every mind focuses on the sequence of movements practiced since childhood. Knock, draw, loose. The first projectiles to cross the empty space between armies are not arrows, but insults. Medieval battles often began with ritual exchanges of challenges and defiance. From the opposite line comes indistinct shouting, occasional recognizable phrases about English parentage or courage. Few pay attention to these words. They are merely the final exhalation before violence. Then comes the command you've been waiting for, dreading, needing. Knock arrows. 20,000 fingers move in, near unison, a choreography of potential destruction. Your hands perform the familiar motion without conscious thought. The smooth shaft seated against the string, the fletchings properly aligned, the bodkin point aimed slightly upward. Draw. The orchestra of creaking yew fills the air as thousands of bows bend in unison. The familiar pressure builds across your back, chest, and arm as you pull the string to your anchor point alongside your ear. 100 pounds of tension held by flesh and bone, the bow's limbs curving into their deadly arc. Pain and purpose intertwine. In this frozen moment, suspended between potential and kinetic energy, time truly stops. Your breathing slows, your vision tunnels to encompass only the distant mass of humanity that has become target rather than fellow men. The bow shivers slightly with your heartbeat. Everything you have trained for condenses into this singular instant. Loose, fingers release in rippling sequence along the line. The snap of strings releasing tension sounds like a massive wave breaking upon a shore. Thousands of arrows leap skyward in a dark cloud that momentarily dims the sun itself. Physics and fate. Now take command as the deadly parabola begins. The sound of a mass arrow volley defies simple description. Those who survived medieval battles often spoke of the hissing death, or the devil's whispers, as arrows passed overhead. From your position, it sounds like the rushing of countless wings, as though every bird in England took flight at once. For 3 terrible, beautiful seconds, nothing exists but anticipation. Then gravity completes its partnership with human intention. The arrow storm descends. Even from your position, you can see the impact ripple through the opposing formation. Men falling, shields hastily raised too late, the front ranks thinning, like wheat beneath an invisible scythe. Some arrows find gaps in armor, others punch through mail links, many embed in shields or ground, but enough find human targets to matter. Knock. The command comes again, shockingly quickly. There is no time to consider what your first arrow may have done. The machinery of battle requires constant motion. The rhythm establishes itself with terrible efficiency. Knock, draw, loose, knock, draw, loose. A trained archer could release between 10 and 12 arrows per minute, each potentially lethal, each following the same perfect arc into the increasingly chaotic mass across the field. Within 5 minutes, your first dozen arrows have left your quiver. Between volleys, you glimpse fragments of the larger battle unfolding. Cavalry moves on the left flank, pennants whipping in the wind of their charge. Infantry adjusts position in response to gaps torn in their formation. Commanders signal frantically as plans meet reality and transform accordingly. The opposing force begins its advance, closing the distance, making each subsequent volley more deadly as accuracy improves with proximity. But this approach carries its own danger for you. Soon they will be close enough to charge, to transform this exchange of projectiles into the chaos of direct combat. Your sergeant shouts above the growing din of battle, "Aim lower! Target the horses!" The tactical shift acknowledges the changing dynamics as distance decreases. Lower trajectories, different targets. The cold calculation of battle logic dictating that unmounted knights become manageable opponents. The physical toll mounts with each volley. Muscles burn with the repetitive strain. Sweat stings eyes despite the cool morning air. Fingers bleed where the string has worn through calluses. Yet you continue the mechanical process, becoming less a man and more a component in a vast killing. Mechanism. Knock, draw, loose. The simplicity brings focus amid chaos. Around you, the costs of this exchange become apparent. An archer to your left stumbles, a crossbow bolt protruding from his shoulder, the Genoese mercenaries finding their range as well. Another man works with an arrow embedded in his thigh, grimacing but still drawing his bow. The dead lie where they fall, their stillness incongruous amid so much frantic movement. The battle's sounds build into an overwhelming cacophony, screams of wounded men and horses, the clash of weapons against armor and shields, commands shouted, then repeated downlines, prayers and curses intermingling. Above it all, the constant rhythm of drums maintains order within chaos, keeping the archer line working in coordinated volleys rather than individual panic. Time loses meaning entirely. What might be minutes feels like days. The sky darkens with clouds, or smoke, or both, creating a premature twilight over the killing field. Your world narrows to the small actions that have defined your training. The precise placement of fingers on string, the alignment of body to target, the smooth release that sends death arcing away from you toward strangers who wish the same for you. Your final arrow leaves the quiver with ceremonial significance. 24 messengers of fate dispatched, their consequences unknown to you amid the smoke and confusion. The empty quiver signifies a transition from ranged combatant to something more vulnerable. Some archers would carry mallets or short swords for the close fighting that might follow if enemy forces broke through. Others would retrieve spent arrows from the field, a dangerous harvesting amid the chaos. As the distance closes further, you see faces rather than merely forms. The abstraction of battle diminishes, replaced by the horrifying intimacy of combat. The man charging toward your position wears a blue surcoat, now darkened with sweat and mud. He has a beard, grey at the edges. He might have children, parents, a life not unlike your own in some distant village. This thought comes unbidden and unwelcome, a crack in the necessary detachment. The detachment returns as survival instinct, takes command. Your hand finds the short mallet tucked into your belt. The stakes placed before your position have slowed the advance, channeled attackers into manageable approaches. You are no longer simply an archer, but a defender of ground, of self, of the men beside you who have become closer than brothers through shared peril. In the strange, suspended reality of battle's fullest expression, a peculiar calm sometimes descends upon combatants. Veterans called it the quiet within the storm, a mental state where terror and training achieve perfect balance. Your movements become economical, your perception heightened, yet focused only on what matters for the next heartbeat of survival. Historians would later record this battle's name, its significance, its consequences for kingdoms and crowns. Maps would show arrows and lines depicting movements of forces as though they were pieces on a game board. But in this moment, there is only the immediate reality, breath, movement, survival, repeating with each heartbeat until darkness or victory or defeat concludes your role in this terrible theatre. The human body remembers what the mind might prefer to forget. Long after battles fade into history and campaigns become mere lines on maps in dusty chronicles, the archer's body carries the permanent record of his profession, a silent, bone-deep testimony written in asymmetry, deformation, and adaptation. Were you to glimpse your reflection in still water, a rare luxury in medieval life, you might barely recognize the transformation your years of archery have wrought. The right side of your body, assuming you draw with the right hand, develops dramatically larger muscle structures than the left. Your drawing arm's bicep and forearm grow prominently defined, while the bow-supporting arm develops differently, creating a curious imbalance that marks you as surely as any guild badge or coat of arms. The skeletal framework beneath this uneven musculature tells an even more profound story. Modern archaeology has revealed these changes with startling clarity. Excavations of medieval archer graves, particularly those from the Mary Rose, Henry VIII's warship that sank in 1545 with hundreds of archers aboard, have yielded skeletons bearing the unmistakable signatures of a life spent at the bow. The shoulder joints of these long-dead archers show distinctive patterns of osteoarthritis, the cartilage worn away after decades of drawing weights that modern archers would consider extreme. The shoulder, designed by nature for flexibility rather than regular bearing of 100-pound forces, eventually surrenders to this unnatural demand. The pain begins as a whisper after practice sessions, easily ignored by younger men. It grows into a constant companion by the third decade of life, a dull ache that intensifies with changes in weather. The body's barometer, calibrated to suffering rather than pressure systems. More dramatic still are the changes to the spine. Vertebrae compress asymmetrically under years of uneven loading. The archer's back gradually twists into a permanent slight rotation, the spine literally reshaping itself around the demands of the bow. These changes appear in archaeological remains as facets and ridges on vertebrae that healthy spines should not possess. Adaptations born of necessity, but purchased with chronic pain. Your forearm bones, the radius and ulna, thicken notably on your drawing arm, visible evidence of the body's remarkable ability to strengthen itself where stress demands. This adaptation proves beneficial, unlike many others, providing structural reinforcement where forces regularly concentrate. When archaeologists measure these bones from archer burials, the difference between arms sometimes exceeds 20% in thickness, an asymmetry found in no other medieval profession except perhaps blacksmiths. The hands themselves bear perhaps the most distinctive and functionally significant changes. Years of drawing heavy bows reshape the fingers that release the string. The first 3 fingers of the drawing hand, index, middle and ring, develop, pronounced ridges on their outer edges where the bowstring has pressed thousands of times. X-rays of archer remains show these ridges as permanent alterations to the bone structure, not merely calluses on soft tissue. More telling still are the deformations of the terminal finger joints. The distal phalanges, the small bones at the fingertips, warp under repeated stress, developing a pronounced curve and lateral displacement. This condition, which modern medicine might diagnose as a type of osteoarthritis, appears consistently in archaeological remains of professional archers. Some specimens show such extreme modifications that the fingers likely remained permanently semi-curved even at rest, as though perpetually prepared to draw a ghostly bow long after death. These skeletal alterations begin in childhood and adolescence, when bones remain malleable. The English law requiring regular bow practice from age 7, the Assize of Arms of 1252, ensured that bodies would grow around the bow's demands rather than merely adapting to them later. Children's skeletons still forming accommodated these stresses more readily than adult bodies, allowing more extreme adaptations with somewhat less pain during the transformation. Beyond the skeletal framework, the soft tissues tell their own story of archery's physical demands. The drawing motion recruits muscles not commonly used in other medieval tasks, the rhomboids between the shoulder blades, the trapezius spanning the upper back, the deltoids capping each shoulder. These muscles develop extraordinary definition in career archers, creating a physique immediately recognizable to knowledgeable observers. The asymmetrical development becomes particularly apparent across the chest, where the pectoral muscle of the drawing side grows substantially larger than its counterpart. This muscular development brings its own complications. muscle groups developed to extraordinary levels for one specific motion often create imbalances that pull joints out of optimal alignment. The archer's drawing shoulder typically sits higher than the bow arm, creating a permanent tilt that affects posture, gait, and, eventually, comfort. The body compensates for these imbalances by recruiting additional muscles, creating chains of tension that spread from the primary archery muscles into the neck, lower back, and hips. The hands develop a strength disproportionate to their size. An experienced archer's grip could crush walnuts or bend light metal, a party trick sometimes displayed in taverns when campaigns ended. This grip strength comes at a cost, however. The flexor tendons thicken with use, while their extensors, the muscles that open the hand, remain comparatively underdeveloped. The resulting imbalance often leads to contractures, a gradual permanent curling of the fingers that progresses with age. Pain becomes such a constant companion that it ceases to register as pain per se, transforming instead into a background condition of existence. Medieval medicine offered little relief beyond alcohol, herbal poultices, and perhaps the services of bone setters who might temporarily realign joints pushed beyond natural positions. More commonly, archers developed their own remedies, stretched holding positions to decompress tormented joints, specific movements to temporarily rebalance muscular tensions, salves of herbs and animal fats applied to inflamed tissues. The eyes, too, pay a price for archery's demands. Years of focusing alternately on close targets during practice and distant enemies during battle create peculiar adaptations in visual processing. Many veteran archers develop an ability to achieve target focus with remarkable speed, yet struggle with transitioning between near and far vision for ordinary tasks. Eye strain headaches become common, particularly as middle age approaches, and the lens naturally stiffens with time. Weather becomes an enemy as personal as any opposing army. Cold penetrates damaged joints with particular viciousness, finding pathways through compromised cartilage to touch bone directly. Rain brings its own miseries, the humidity causing inflamed tissues to swell further, restricting movement at precisely the moments when flexibility might be most needed. Veterans learn to predict weather changes through the variable chorus of aches that precede visible clouds by hours or days. Sleep transforms from natural restoration to negotiated compromise. Finding comfortable positions becomes a nightly puzzle when shoulders refuse to lie flat, fingers curl unbidden, and the spine protests lateral pressure. Many archers develop the habit of sleeping semi-upright, back supported against walls or bolsters, arms carefully arranged to minimize nocturnal discomfort. Dreams often replay the drawing motion, the body's memory asserting itself even in unconsciousness. Yet for all this physical transformation and discomfort, the body's adaptations serve their purpose with remarkable efficiency. The deformed fingers release strings with greater consistency than pristine hands could achieve. The asymmetrical musculature generates power with mechanical advantage that symmetrical development would not provide. The altered spine creates a stable platform precisely calibrated to the archer's unique drawing motion. Pain becomes merely information, assessed and accommodated rather than heeded as warning. These adaptations represent a profound conversation between human intention and biological reality, a negotiation where victory conditions accept permanent alteration as reasonable cost for specialized capability. The professional archer essentially sacrifices his body's future comfort for present effectiveness, a bargain whose terms become fully apparent only in later decades, when war no longer calls for his particular skills, but his altered frame continues to speak their necessity. The medieval archer's body thus becomes both tool and record, the living implementation of military policy and the physical archive of its consequences. Each twisted joint and strengthened bone represents the intersection of royal decree, martial necessity, personal livelihood, and biological adaptation, a complex harmony of causes producing a singular physical result replicated across thousands of individuals whose remains would eventually provide archaeologists with one of the most distinctive occupational markers in human history. Modern sports medicine would recognize many of these patterns as overuse injuries, conditions now treated with anti-inflammatories, physical therapy, and modified training regimens. The medieval archer had no such interventions available. His body simply adapted until it could adapt no further, then endured what could not be changed. When function finally failed, communities supported these veterans as best they're limited, resources allowed, recognizing the sacrifice written in bone and sinew. As you lie awake in the quiet darkness after a day of practice or campaign, cataloguing the various complaints your body whispers or shouts, you might understand this transformation as a type of gradual martyrdom, not the dramatic sacrifice of saints, but the slow surrender of physical wholeness to skill, duty, and necessity. Your body has become the bow's memory, carrying its requirements forward, even when the yew stave itself has long since been unstrung. The relationship between nourishment and capability forms one of the archer's most fundamental concerns, though rarely voiced in formal military treatises. Your body, that living weapon so carefully trained and irreversibly transformed, requires fuel proportionate to its extraordinary demands. Hunger becomes more than discomfort. It becomes tactical vulnerability when arms can no longer draw the necessary weight. The medieval archer's caloric requirements exceeded those of nearly any other profession of the era. Modern sports physiologists estimate that maintaining a body capable of repeatedly drawing a 100-plus pound bow requires between 3,500 and 4,500 calories daily, a quantity challenging to acquire even in times of plenty, nearly impossible during campaigns or sieges. Your morning begins with breaking the night's fast, ideally with a substantial porridge of oats or barley, perhaps enriched with whatever fats might be available, butter in fortunate times, more commonly, tallow or lard. The grain provides slow-burning carbohydrates that sustain energy through morning practice sessions. Those prosperous enough might add honey for additional calories, though sweetness remained a luxury rather than expectation for common archers. Bread forms the foundation of daily sustenance, as it did for most medieval Europeans. Yet where the average peasant might consume 1 to 2 pounds daily, the working archer requires nearly double this amount. The coarse brown bread contains the entire grain, including bran that modern diets often discard. This provides not merely calories but necessary fiber to maintain digestive health during periods of physical stress. Meat appears on your table with frequency dictated by economic station rather than nutritional need. Professional archers, retained by noble households or royal armies, receive meat rations exceeding those of common infantry, typically several pounds weekly rather than merely on feast days. This protein allocation acknowledges the specific requirements of maintaining the extraordinary musculature developed through years of practice. Campaign rations tell a different story. Salted beef or pork, parceled in quantities reflecting rank rather than physical need, must often stretch beyond intended durations. The English armies in France became notorious for chevauchée tactics, destructive raids specifically targeting food sources to sustain themselves while denying sustenance to defensive forces and civilian populations. Your plate during these times might hold whatever local procurement provides. Requisitioned livestock, foraged plants, occasionally even unripened field crops roasted directly over campaign fires. Fish provides critical protein in coastal regions and along rivers, particularly during religious fast days when meat consumption faces restriction. Preserved through salting or smoking, fish travels with armies as compact nutrition, though its quality diminishes drastically during extended campaigns. Fresh-caught fish becomes cause for celebration when armies camp near suitable waters, a momentary respite from the monotony of travel rations. The common medieval drink, ale, serves archer and army alike as both hydration and caloric supplement. Water sources during campaigns carry constant risk of contamination, particularly when thousands of men and horses occupy confined encampments. The brewing process naturally sterilizes water. while the resulting beverage provides additional carbohydrates and B vitamins essential for energy metabolism. Daily consumption often exceeds a gallon per man, though at lower alcohol content than modern equivalents. Vegetables appear in your diet primarily as ingredients in pottage, the ubiquitous stew that simmers continuously over communal fires. Onions, garlic, turnips, and cabbage provide flavoring and vital nutrients. Though medieval nutritional understanding attributed their benefits to balancing bodily humors rather than providing vitamins and minerals, during extended sieges or winter campaigns, these fresh components disappear entirely, replaced by dried peas or beans that store indefinitely but require extended cooking to become palatable. The rhythms of eating follow practical necessity rather than strict scheduling. Before dawn practice, a substantial breakfast provides foundation energy. Midday brings a lighter meal, often cold bread and cheese carried to practice fields or consumed during march breaks on campaign. Evening meals become the day's most substantial, ideally featuring protein to support overnight muscle repair, though this nutritional timing develops through observation of results rather than scientific understanding. Feast days present rare opportunities for caloric abundance. After successful campaigns or during important religious celebrations, the archer's plate might hold unfamiliar luxuries: spiced wine, roasted fowl, sweetmeats flavored with imported cinnamon or ginger. These occasions serve multiple purposes beyond mere indulgence. They restore depleted energy reserves after periods of exertion, strengthen social bonds between fighting men, and provide psychological rewards for service often rendered under extreme conditions. The archer's relationship with hunger becomes necessarily philosophical. During campaigns, particularly in hostile territory or seasons of scarcity, rationing becomes inevitable. You learn to differentiate between true hunger and merely being unfilled, a distinction that serves both survival and discipline. The morning bowl of porridge shrinks by calculated increments. The evening bread receives careful division to reserve a portion for pre-dawn consumption. Hunger becomes information rather than emergency. This calculated approach to sustenance extends to water as well. The exertion of regular practice or battle creates substantial fluid requirements. Modern estimates suggest 8 to 10 pints daily under active conditions. Yet carrying sufficient water during marches presents logistical challenges, while securing safe sources in unfamiliar territory carries inherent risk. You develop a disciplined approach to hydration, drinking deeply when sources present themselves, rather than according to immediate thirst. The bodily consequence of insufficient nutrition manifests in ways specific to archery. When caloric intake falls below expenditure for extended periods, the body conserves energy by reducing non-essential functions. Fine motor control, essential for consistent arrow release, deteriorates first. Concentration wavers, affecting accuracy at distance. The muscles capable of drawing 100+ pounds with proper nutrition might manage only 70-80 pounds when in caloric deficit, significantly reducing effective range and armor penetration capability. These effects create a compounding tactical vulnerability. Armies rely on archers for initiating engagements at distance, disrupting enemy formations before closer combat begins. When nutrition fails, this crucial advantage diminishes precisely when most needed. Military commanders with practical experience recognize this relationship, sometimes prioritizing archer provisions even over their own comfort, a decision reflecting pragmatic necessity rather than egalitarian impulse. Beyond immediate performance, nutrition affects recovery and longevity. The professional archer's career depends on maintaining extraordinary physical capability over decades rather than merely for individual campaigns. Chronic undernourishment accelerates joint deterioration, reduces tissue repair capacity, and increases vulnerability to both battlefield injuries and common illnesses. The archer who receives consistent, adequate nutrition might remain effective into his 4th decade. His undernourished counterpart rarely sees 30 with bow still in hand. Food becomes memory and anticipation during extended campaigns. In quiet moments around evening fires, conversations turn inevitably to remembered meals from home. The distinctive bread from a mother's oven, the particular way a wife prepared festival dishes, the specific apple trees whose fruit awaited autumn return from campaign. These food memories serve as emotional anchors, connecting men to identities beyond their immediate martial purpose. Certain foods acquire superstitious significance within archer communities. Eggs consumed before important contests supposedly improve eye clarity. Specific herb combinations rubbed into meat, rosemary, thyme, sage, become associated with successful performances and thereafter carefully replicated before engagements. Some archers refuse particular foods before battle, attributing past failures to their consumption. These beliefs, while lacking scientific foundation, provide psychological comfort and routine in circumstances where control remains largely illusory. Shared meals forge bonds between fighting men that transcend mere sustenance. The archer who shares his dwindling rations with a struggling comrade creates obligations beyond formal military hierarchy. Food gifted during scarcity establishes deeper trust than any sworn oath. Conversely, the man who hoards supplies or steals from communal resources faces ostracism more damaging than official punishment. His isolation potentially fatal when battle demands mutual protection. The contrast between sustenance on campaign and at home creates one of the professional archer's most profound transitions. Returning from war to village life means adapting not merely to peace, but to different rhythms of nourishment. The body accustomed to intermittent feast and famine must readjust to consistent, though perhaps humble, daily provision. Some veterans find this transition surprisingly difficult, their metabolism and psychology having adapted to campaign patterns over years or decades. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps your mind still catalogues the day's intake against its expenditure. The unconscious calculation balances what your transformed body received against what it required. Tomorrow's performance, whether in practice, tournament, or battle, depends partly on this invisible equation. In this way, the medieval archer develops an intuitive understanding of nutrition's role in human capability, centuries before science would provide formal explanation for these observations. Food thus becomes more than mere sustenance. It transforms into tactical resource, social currency, psychological comfort, and physical necessity. Your relationship with nourishment forms an essential component of professional identity, as distinctive as calloused fingers or asymmetrical shoulders. The archer's diet, rarely discussed in military treatises, yet fundamental to battlefield effectiveness, represents perhaps the most basic yet critical logistical concern of medieval warfare. The medieval archer occupies a curious liminal space in the rigidly defined social hierarchy of his time, neither fully integrated into the chivalric military class, nor relegated entirely to common infantry status. This ambiguous position creates a unique social identity, at once valued for specialized skill, yet constrained by birth and tradition. You likely began life as the son of a yeoman farmer, craftsman, or perhaps a smaller landholder, positioned in that middle stratum of medieval society with sufficient resources to maintain a bow and arrows, yet without the wealth or bloodline to aspire to knighthood. The Assize of Arms of 1252 formalized this relationship between social class and military obligation, requiring men of specific income levels to maintain particular weapons. Those with land worth between 40 and 100 shillings were obligated to possess bow and arrows, a deliberate targeting of this middle economic tier for archery service. This initial class positioning follows you throughout your career, creating boundaries both visible and invisible. Unlike knights, who might rise through exceptional service to receive lands or titles, the professional archer's advancement remains largely constrained within his original social context. Exceptional skill might earn increased pay, special appointments, or leadership positions among other archers, but rarely facilitates crossing the significant divide between common and gentle birth. Pay scales reflect this stratified value system with mathematical precision. During the 100 Years' War, an English knight received approximately 2 shillings daily on campaign, 6 times the wage of a common infantry soldier at 4 pence. The archer's compensation fell precisely between these extremes at 6 pence to 8 pence daily, explicitly quantifying your worth relative to other military roles. This wage, while modest by noble standards, exceeded what most could earn through agricultural labour or common trades, creating economic incentive that complemented legal obligation. Your relationship with knights and men-at-arms encompasses complex, sometimes contradictory dynamics. On the battlefield, a curious interdependence emerges. Your arrows disrupt enemy formations and target opposing cavalry, creating opportunities for armoured fighters to exploit. Yet social interaction beyond combat rarely reflects this tactical partnership. You might save a nobleman's life with well-placed arrows one day, yet find yourself invisible to him in camp that evening, the social distance maintained despite shared survival. Among yourselves, archers develop distinct hierarchies based on demonstrated skill rather than birth order or family connection. The man who consistently places arrows at greatest distance, or groups shots most tightly, or maintains composure under battlefield conditions, naturally assumes informal leadership regardless of official appointment. This meritocratic structure exists as an alternate social system running parallel to, yet separate from, the formal feudal hierarchy. The archer's professional identity manifests physically as well as socially. Your calloused draw fingers, asymmetrical musculature, and distinctive posture mark you as surely as any nobleman's heraldry. Contemporary sources describe being able to identify archers by silhouette alone, even at considerable distance. This physical distinctiveness becomes a source of professional pride, visible evidence of capability earned through years of disciplined practice rather than inherited at birth. Villages with strong archery traditions often develop reputations extending beyond their immediate regions. During the height of English longbow dominance, certain communities in Wales and the English border counties became known specifically for producing exceptional bowmen. This collective identity transfers to individual archers, who carry their place of origin as an informal credential. He's a Cheshire archer might communicate volumes about expected skill level and shooting style without need for further qualification. Your integration into broader society depends largely on political circumstance and military necessity. During Sanj, periods of active conflict, the archer's value increases dramatically, with recruitment efforts, wage incentives, and social recognition reflecting your tactical importance. Between major campaigns, this elevated status often diminishes, returning you to the baseline social position determined by birth and wealth rather than martial skill. Religious institutions provide another context for understanding the archer's social position. The medieval church maintained complex, sometimes contradictory perspectives on martial pursuits. Knights could reconcile their violent profession with Christian values through codes of chivalry and concepts of just warfare. Common soldiers might claim necessity or obedience to authority as moral justification. The archer, however, occupied a particularly problematic theological position, killing at distance, often anonymously, without the direct personal risk that medieval thought sometimes used to morally balance the taking of life. Some church authorities specifically condemned archery as morally inferior to direct combat, with Pope Innocent II actually attempting to ban crossbows, though not longbows specifically, as deadly and odious to God at the Second Lateran Council in 1139. While this prohibition proved entirely ineffective and was largely ignored, it reflects the persistent moral ambiguity surrounding projectile warfare in medieval thought. Local priests, more pragmatic than distant theologians, generally accommodated the reality of archery's tactical necessity while providing spiritual guidance, tailored to the archer's specific circumstances. Special prayers before battle, particular confessional practices, and customized penances acknowledge both the necessity of your service and its moral complexities. This religious accommodation helped integrate the archer role into the broader social and spiritual framework despite its theological complications. Marriage and family relationships present yet another dimension of the archer's social position. Your seasonal absence during campaigns creates patterns of intermittent family life, similar to modern military deployments. Women in archer communities necessarily develop greater independence and authority within households than might be typical in other medieval contexts. Children grow accustomed to fathers who appear and disappear with campaign cycles, whose return brings both joy and adjustment as household dynamics re-establish. The physical demands of archery influence family planning as well. While most medieval, men might remain at least nominally capable of their occupations into their 5th or 6th decades. The professional archer's career often ends earlier as joint deterioration and diminished strength reduce effectiveness. Families develop strategies to manage this predictable arc, training sons early, diversifying skills, maintaining secondary occupations that require less physical capacity. The archer's household thus organizes itself around the realities of both periodic absence and eventual disability. Your position within the community reflects dual identity as both specialized military professional and ordinary villager. Between campaigns, you likely maintain secondary occupations, perhaps farming, forestry, or crafts consistent with archery's physical demands. These alternate roles help integrate you into local economic life while providing supplementary income during periods when military service is not required. Community traditions reinforce this integration. The mandatory Sunday practice at the butts after church services brings archers together regularly, creating social bonds through shared activity, while maintaining military readiness. These gatherings often incorporate elements of both training and celebration. Competitive matches with nominal prizes, communal meals, storytelling that transmits both technical knowledge and cultural identity to younger generations. The veteran. Archer returning from successful campaigns embodies a complex status, respected for skill and experience, yet often physically marked by the profession's toll. Your stories from distant battlefields bring broader perspective to village life, connecting local existence to larger historical events. Children gather to hear descriptions of foreign landscapes and peoples. Adults extract practical information about political developments that might eventually affect local concerns. Language itself reflects the archer's distinctive social position. A specialized vocabulary develops around the profession, terms for equipment components, shooting techniques, and tactical formations that remain opaque to outsiders. This technical language functions both practically, enabling precise communication about complex activities, and socially defining group membership through shared terminology. Your distinctive identity persists even in retirement, when physical capability no longer permits military service. The veteran archer often transitions to training roles, passing accumulated knowledge to younger generations. Some find positions as gamekeepers or foresters, where intimate familiarity with woodland, environments and diminished physical demands accommodate aging bodies. Others leverage specialized knowledge as bowyers or fletchers, creating the very equipment they once wielded. Throughout these transitions, the fundamental social contradiction remains: exceptional capability within a specialized domain coexisting with predetermined social limitations. The aging archer's gnarled hands and storied experience command genuine respect, yet rarely translate into advancement beyond the social tier of his birth. This tension between demonstrated merit and inherited status creates one of the most distinctive aspects of the professional archer's identity. As you lie awake, contemplating your position in this stratified world, perhaps you recognize both the constraints and opportunities your specialized role provides. Your calloused fingers and asymmetrical frame mark you as unmistakably distinct from both nobleman and common laborer, a physical embodiment of the middle ground you occupy in medieval society's complex hierarchy. In the morning, when you nock an arrow to string and draw the familiar weight, this social ambiguity temporarily resolves into pure function. The bow knows nothing of birth or bloodline. It responds only to trained capability, to the disciplined body that has shaped itself around its demands. In this moment of perfect alignment between individual skill and tactical purpose, the social contradictions briefly fade, replaced by the simple, powerful clarity of becoming precisely what you were trained to be. The transition from war to peace brings its own distinctive challenges for the professional archer. Your body, transformed through years of specialized training, does not simply revert to an untrained state when campaigns conclude. Your skills, honed to lethal precision, require continuing maintenance even when their primary purpose temporarily subsides. The medieval archer's peacetime existence thus unfolds as a careful balance between maintaining martial capability and reintegrating into civilian contexts. The legal framework that created England's Archer Corps ensures this continuity between war and peace. The Statute of Winchester, 1285, formalized the requirement for regular practice, mandating that all able-bodied men between 15 and 60 years maintain their archery skills regardless of immediate military necessity. This requirement gained additional enforcement through the 1363 archery law, which actually prohibited most other sports on Sundays and holidays, ensuring that leisure time served military preparedness rather than competing with it. Your Sundays thus maintain a predictable rhythm even in deepest peace. After church services conclude, the parish community processes to the butts, earthen mounds established at the edge of the village specifically for archery practice. These sessions carry legal obligation, but evolve into social institutions transcending mere compliance. Friendly competition, small wages, communal meals, and skill demonstrations transform mandatory practice into community celebration. The butts themselves become landscaping features defining medieval English communities. Typically positioned at 220 yards from designated shooting positions, the effective battlefield range for massed archery, they serve as constant visual reminders of military obligation made permanent in the geographical layout of villages and towns. Some communities establish multiple target ranges at varying distances to develop skills progressively, creating a patchwork of archery-specific spaces integrated into daily life. Between these mandatory sessions, you likely maintain personal practice routines developed during more active service. The morning hours before agricultural work might find you drawing the bow without arrows. Strengthening exercises focused on maintaining the specific muscles developed through years of training. Evening sessions might emphasize accuracy at varying distances, keeping the coordinated movements of knock, draw, and release embedded in muscle memory despite less frequent application. Tournaments provide another bridge between war and peace, offering both practice opportunities and potential income. Unlike the grand tournaments where knights competed in mock combat, archery competitions operated on more modest scale, yet attracted substantial local interest. County and regional competitions established shooting hierarchies that paralleled military unit organization, identifying the most skilled archers for potential recruitment when conflicts resumed. These competitions often coincided with seasonal festivals and market days, integrating martial skill demonstration into broader community celebrations. Success in such events might earn modest prizes, perhaps a silver arrow, a new bow, or small purses of coins. But more importantly, they established reputation that could translate into future military appointment or advancement. The archer, who consistently dominated local competitions, might receive notice from lords seeking to fulfill their military obligations with the most capable retainers. Between formal tournaments, informal competitions emerge organically wherever archers gather. Tavern challenges, impromptu village contests, and friendly wages maintain both skill and community connection. These casual encounters often develop their own distinctive formats, shooting at unusually small targets from awkward positions or under artificially imposed constraints, creating variation that enhances adaptability while preserving core techniques. Many professional archers supplement their income during peacetime through hunting, where their specialized skills find natural application. While medieval hunting rights remained strictly controlled, with forests and game reserves legally restricted, to nobility, various arrangements emerged to accommodate skilled bowmen. Some received formal appointment as foresters or gamekeepers, maintaining the king's or lord's hunting preserves while authorized to take certain game for personal consumption. Others entered service in noble households specifically as hunting specialists. Their military experience translated directly to pursuit of deer and boar for aristocratic tables. These positions offered relative stability between campaigns while maintaining archery skills in practical application. The techniques differ somewhat. Hunting emphasizes single, precisely placed shots rather than massed volleys. But the fundamental, physical capabilities remain consistent between martial and hunting applications. Those without such formal appointments often found less official arrangements. Poaching, technically illegal yet widely practiced, provided both supplementary food and occasional income. The skilled archer could take game silently, at night, with minimal evidence of his presence. While penalties for poaching could be severe if discovered, local authorities often maintained strategic ignorance of such activities among veterans, recognizing both the practical impossibility of prevention and the social undesirability of punishing men who had served in national conflicts. Beyond hunting, many archers maintained secondary occupations compatible with their primary military identity. Woodworking crafts, requiring similar attention to material properties and environmental factors, offer natural alignment. Some become bowyers, crafting the very weapons they expertly wield, applying intimate knowledge of bow behavior gained through years of practical use. Others specialize as fletchers, producing the arrows whose flight characteristics they understand through countless releases. Agricultural work provides another common occupation between campaigns, particularly tenancy farming, that allows flexibility for military service when required. The physical demands of agriculture, though substantial, use different muscle groups than archery's specialized movements, creating complementary rather than competing physical development. The seasonal nature of both farming and warfare in medieval Europe often aligned conveniently, with major campaigns typically occurring between planting and harvest. Guard duty presents another peacetime application of martial skills, particularly in towns and cities where merchant wealth requires protection. The professional archer's disciplined demeanor, physical capability, and ranged expertise make him valuable for both deterrence and response to threats against commerce or property. These positions offer regular income with maintained military identity, bridging the potential gap between major campaigns. Family life develops its own rhythms, adapted to this oscillation between war and peace. Marriages often coincide with extended, peaceful periods, with children born during intervals between conflicts. The archer's household typically develops more flexible gender roles than might be found in other medieval contexts, with wives necessarily assuming greater authority during extended absences. Children grow accustomed to fathers who periodically disappear, then return, sometimes changed by experiences difficult to fully communicate across the civil-military divide. Your relationship with your bow transforms during peacetime as well. The weapon that served as primary professional tool becomes simultaneously working implement, insurance against future conflict, and symbol of identity. Many archers develop almost superstitious attachment to particular bows that served them well in combat, maintaining these with extraordinary care despite having others available for daily practice or hunting. These veteran bows occupy places of honor in humble homes, visual testimony to experience and capability. The psychological transition between war and peace presents challenges perhaps more complex than the practical adjustments. Having witnessed extreme violence and experienced the peculiar combinations of terror, exhilaration, boredom, and camaraderie that constitute campaign life, many archers find complete reintegration into placid village existence difficult to achieve. Contemporary accounts describe veterans who startle at sudden sounds, who drink excessively during festive occasions, who wake shouting from dreams populated by battlefield memories. Communities develop various strategies for managing these reintegration challenges. Religious rituals specifically designed for returning warriors provide spiritual frameworks for processing combat experiences. Gathering spaces where veterans congregate allow shared understanding without explicit discussion. Periodic militia, musters and training sessions maintain not only physical skills, but social connections formed through shared martial identity. Your hands, shaped by war into specialized tools, must relearn peace with each campaign's conclusion. The same fingers that loosed arrows into enemy formations now plant seeds, shape wood, hold children, or turn prayer beads. This duality of purpose, creation and destruction embodied in the same calloused appendages, perhaps best symbolizes the medieval archer's fundamental experience of oscillating between civilian and military identities as political circumstances dictate. As darkness deepens and sleep approaches, you might contemplate this curious divided existence. How your body bears permanent evidence of martial purpose, even as it performs peaceful functions. How your mind contains both battlefield awareness and domestic concern. How your social position encompasses both specialized military value and ordinary community membership. This integration of seemingly contradictory roles into coherent identity represents perhaps the most sophisticated achievement of the professional archer's existence. More complex even than mastery of the deceptively simple wooden bow that defines your place in medieval society. The relationship between protection and penetration defines much of military history, a perpetual conversation between shield and sword, armor and arrow, fortification and siege engine. As a medieval archer, you occupy a pivotal position in one of history's most significant technological narratives, witnessing the longbow's ascendance, dominance, and eventual obsolescence against the backdrop of evolving medieval warfare. The English longbow itself represents the culmination of centuries of incremental development rather than sudden innovation. Its ancestry traces through Welsh and Norman influences, with each generation making subtle refinements to draw weight, dimensional proportions, and material selection. By the time of its documented battlefield dominance in the 14th century, the weapon had achieved near-perfect alignment between available materials, human physical capability, and tactical requirements. Your grandparents might have told stories of archery before its full martial potential had been realized, when bows drew merely 60 pounds instead of the 100-plus standard of your generation, when arrow designs had not yet specialized for different targets, when tactics still treated archers as auxiliary support rather than primary battlefield elements. Each of these developments represented responses to evolving challenges, particularly the increasing sophistication of personal armor. The mail armor of earlier centuries, interlocked metal rings forming flexible protective garments, had provided reasonable defense against slashing weapons and incidental protection against arrows. Your ancestors developed bodkin points in response, narrow, chisel-like arrowheads specifically designed to part mail links rather than penetrate through sheer impact. This evolutionary response temporarily restored the advantage to the archer, though at cost of reduced damage once penetration occurred. The introduction of plate armor during the 13th and 14th centuries presented a more formidable challenge. Solid metal sheets, curved to deflect impact and distribute force, resisted even well-designed bodkin points, except at close range or perfect angles of impact. The archers' community responded with two parallel adaptations: substantially increased draw weights, applying greater kinetic energy to each shot, and redesigned arrowheads with hardened tips and optimal geometries for defeating plate defenses. This technological arms race extended beyond materials to encompass tactics and formations. Plate-armored knights adopted wedge formations specifically to present minimal frontal area to archer volleys. Archers countered with disciplined staggered positioning and coordinated fire to maintain lethal arrow density despite defensive innovations. Each adaptation begat counter-adaptation in the perpetual cycle that characterizes military technological evolution. Your daily practice maintains not merely personal skill, but participation in this larger technological system. When you draw the heavy war bow, your muscles continue the physical adaptation that increased draw weights made necessary. When you select specialized arrowheads for different targets during training, you implement the tactical responses developed against evolving armor. Your individual actions thus form part of a collective technological adaptation spanning generations. Beyond the bow itself, adjacent technologies evolved in concert with archery's battlefield role. Arrow production became increasingly standardized, with shaft dimensions, fletchings, and point designs achieving remarkable consistency to ensure predictable flight characteristics. Quiver designs evolved to balance protection, capacity, and accessibility under battlefield conditions. Even bowstring materials and treatments underwent continuous refinement to maintain performance in varying weather conditions. The effective integration of these technological elements required institutional knowledge as much as individual skill. Master fletchers passed specialized techniques through apprenticeship systems. Experienced campaigners transmitted tactical applications through formal and informal instruction. Bowyers selected materials based on accumulated observation rather than written specification. This distributed knowledge network ensured that technological momentum continued despite individual casualties or regional setbacks. While dwelling within this technological tradition, you likely recognize competitive innovations developing in parallel across Europe. The crossbow represents perhaps the most significant alternative projectile technology, offering comparable penetrating power without requiring lifelong physical conditioning, though at significant cost to rate of fire and battlefield mobility. Various kingdoms and mercenary companies maintain crossbowmen as their primary missile troops, particularly in regions without England's established longbow tradition. Military engineers continue developing mechanical artillery with increasing sophistication during your lifetime. Traction trebuchets give way to counterweight designs capable of hurling projectiles weighing hundreds of pounds. Early gunpowder weapons appear on European battlefields, initially more terrifying than lethal, but improving with each generation. These developments do not immediately threaten archery's battlefield dominance, but foreshadow coming transformations that subsequent generations will fully experience. The twilight of the longbow's supremacy likely occurs just beyond your professional horizon. By the late 15th century, plate armor achieves designs that effectively resist even the heaviest war arrows, except at point-blank ranges or vulnerable joints. Simultaneously, firearms develop sufficient reliability and penetrating power to defeat the same armor with minimal training requirements. The specialized archer, product of lifetime development, gradually becomes less cost-effective than the gunner trained in weeks rather than decades. This transition occurs not as sudden replacement, but as gradual shift in military investment and tactical emphasis. English armies maintain archer contingents alongside growing numbers of gunners throughout the 15th and into the 16th centuries. The Mary Rose, sunk in 1545, carried both archers and gunners among her complement. Vivid archaeological evidence of technological overlap rather than abrupt substitution. Your personal experience of this transition depends on when within this evolutionary timeline your career unfolds. Archers at Crécy, 1346, or Agincourt, 1415, operated at the apex of their weapons' battlefield relevance, their technological system perfectly aligned with tactical requirements. Those serving a century later encountered increasing evidence of their gradual obsolescence. More frequent armor capable of defeating their arrows, more gun-armed troops appearing in opposing and allied forces alike. The psychological dimensions of technological transition prove perhaps more complex than the practical adjustments. Military traditions develop powerful cultural momentum, with proven techniques acquiring almost religious significance among practitioners. The archer who has spent decades perfecting his craft naturally resists evidence of its diminishing relevance. Contemporary accounts describe veteran archers dismissing early firearms as unreliable, inaccurate, and lacking the spiritual connection between warrior and weapon that archery cultivated. This resistance appears not merely as stubborn conservatism, but as defense of genuinely superior characteristics that new technologies had not yet matched. Early firearms indeed proved less accurate, slower to reload, and more vulnerable to weather conditions than the longbow in experienced hands. The archer's skepticism reflected valid technical assessment as much as emotional attachment to traditional methods. Institutional inertia reinforced this resistance. The elaborate systems that supported English archery, the legal requirements for practice, the supply chains for yew-staves and arrow components, the established tactical doctrines, represented massive investment not easily abandoned or redirected. Military leadership, often comprising men whose own careers advanced through successful application of archery-centric tactics, naturally hesitated to embrace unproven alternatives regardless of their theoretical advantages. Yet beneath this resistance, pragmatic adaptation continued. Archers incorporated early firearms into their tactical understanding, learning to coordinate with gunners just as they had previously coordinated with mounted knights. Some veterans, trained in both disciplines, maintaining archery skill while developing proficiency with the emerging technology. The more forward-thinking among military leaders began shifting resource allocation gradually toward gunpowder weapons without abandoning proven archery capabilities before viable replacements were established. Archaeological evidence from this transitional period reveals fascinating material adaptations. Arrow designs show increased specialization against evolving armor, with sophisticated combinations of hardened tips and bodkin profiles attempting to counter plate armor's increasing effectiveness. Bowyers experimented with composite materials and modified dimensions seeking marginal performance improvements against technological headwinds. These physical artifacts demonstrate not passive acceptance of obsolescence, but active resistance through innovation within an established technological paradigm. The institutional knowledge accumulated through centuries of archery tradition did not simply disappear but transformed and transferred to emerging technologies. Ballistic understanding developed through archery influenced early firearms tactics. Mathematical principles worked out for predicting arrow trajectories found application in artillery operations. Even the disciplined volley fire that characterized English longbow tactics transferred directly to musket lines of subsequent centuries. Your personal relationship with this technological narrative likely includes elements of both pride in established tradition and curiosity about emerging alternatives. The veteran archer might view early firearms with skeptical interest, recognizing their promise while noting their present limitations. The younger practitioner might actively seek familiarity with both systems, hedging against uncertain technological futures through diverse skill development. As darkness gathers and sleep approaches, perhaps you contemplate this curious position at the inflection point of military technology, how your highly specialized skill, developed through lifetime dedication, participates in historical forces larger than any individual career. Your calloused fingers, shaped to the bow's demands, might occasionally handle an arquebus or early matchlock, sensing both connection and difference in these implements of a changing martial landscape. This technological transition carries philosophical as well as practical implications. The longbow archer represents a particular relationship between human and weapon, one requiring physiological transformation, lifetime commitment, and intimate material understanding. The gunner embodies a different relationship, more technical than physical, more operational than developmental, more easily transferred between individuals. These distinct paradigms of warfare reflect broader shifts in how humans relate to technology across medieval society's gradual transformation toward modernity. The mist clung to the Welsh hills as Hugh de Staunton drew his bow for the first time that morning, his breath visible in the autumn chill. Born around 1320 in a small village near the English border, Hugh's story emerges from fragments preserved in military records, personal correspondence, and local church registers, offering rare insight into an individual life set against the sweeping canvas of the 100 Years' War. Hugh's childhood unfolded much like your own hypothetical experience. Regular practice at the butts after Sunday, services, progressively heavier bows as adolescent muscles developed. The gradual transformation of play into professional preparation. His father, a modest landholder with responsibilities to provide military service when summoned, ensured his son's training exceeded the minimal requirements of statute. Whether through unusual natural aptitude or exceptional diligence, Hugh developed reputation for remarkable accuracy by his 16th year. The first surviving record of Hugh appears in a 1337 muster roll for troops raised in the Welsh marches, shortly after the war with France began. Listed as archer, serviceable, well-equipped, he received standard pay of 3d daily during this initial training period. His bowstave, crafted from local yew rather than the superior Spanish or Italian varieties, nevertheless met the requirements for military service. 24 arrows in his quiver bore his personal mark, a simple cross cutting through a circle, carved into each shaft just behind the pile. Hugh's first campaign experience came during the Flanders expedition of 1338, when English forces under Walter Manny conducted raids along the northern French coast. Contemporary accounts describe these operations as primarily economic warfare, burning crops, disrupting trade, demonstrating English capability to project force across the Channel. For a young archer experiencing his first deployment, the campaign provided valuable exposure to military discipline and logistics without the full intensity of major field battles. The surviving fragment of a letter Hugh sent home during this period reveals both growing confidence and lingering connection to civilian identity. The bow serves well, though I find myself wishing for Spanish yew like some of the southern archers carry. We have burned 3 villages since crossing to France. Strange to think men lived there just days ago. Tell father the wheat looks much like ours, though the soil seems darker. Hugh's military career accelerated as Edward III launched major, offensive operations into France. The payment records for 1342 show his rate increased to 4d daily, indicating promotion to a specialist archer position, possibly as a result of demonstrated skill during previous campaigns. His unit assignment shifted from regional levy to royal retinue, placing him among archers directly responsible to the crown rather than local nobility, a significant professional advancement reflecting recognized capability. The definitive turn in Hugh's career came at the Battle of Crécy in 1346. While the historical record cannot confirm his exact position on that storied battlefield, his unit placement would have situated him near the right flank of the English position, where the initial French cavalry charges focus particular attention. The mechanical efficiency of the English archers during this engagement, with volleys launching at precisely timed intervals to maximize both physical and psychological impact against advancing forces, demonstrated the full realization of the longbow's tactical potential. A royal account book from December 1346 contains the brief notation, "To Hugh de Staunton, archer, for exceptional service at Crécy, 10 shillings. A substantial bonus indicating specific recognition beyond routine duty." Whether this acknowledged particular acts of heroism, unusual endurance through the extended engagement, or exceptional accuracy against high-value targets, remains unspecified. Whatever the specific circumstance, this payment marked Hugh's elevation from anonymous military component to individually recognized asset. His subsequent assignment reflected this enhanced status. Records from 1347 place him among archers detailed to the siege of Calais, where Edward III sought to secure a permanent foothold on French soil. Unlike the brief, intense engagement at Crécy, the Calais operation extended 11 months, testing different aspects of military character, patience, discipline during extended inactivity, resistance to disease that typically claimed more lives than combat during medieval sieges. The comparative security of this assignment enabled Hugh to maintain more regular correspondence with his family. 3 letters survive from this period, providing unusual insight into the common archer's perspective on extended operations. He describes the monotony of siege duty, the shifting seasons outside the city walls, the gradual construction of what effectively became an English town opposite the French fortification. We have built proper streets and markets with some, men bringing their trade skills to earn extra coin. Strange to think we have lived longer here than many stay in English villages. More telling is his reflection on the archer's perspective of larger strategic concerns. The commanders speak of supply ships and French relief armies, but for us, the world shrinks to daily arrow counts and bowstring waxing. I have shot more shafts at stone walls these past months than at men, though occasionally they venture out where our range can find them. It is a peculiar war where waiting becomes the primary weapon. Following Calais, Hugh's experience reflects the campaign, pattern typical for professional archers of the period. Records place him with forces in Brittany, 1351, on expedition to Gascony, 1354, and among troops responding to French incursions into English-held territories in 1356. His pay rate during these operations increased to 6 pence daily, then 8 pence, the maximum typically granted to non-noble archers, regardless of experience or skill, a ceiling reflecting the social limitations within which even exceptional common-born specialists operated. Hugh appears to have returned temporarily to England between these deployments, as parish records from his home region record his marriage to Agnes Miller in 1352 and the birth of sons in 1353 and 1355. These domestic interludes between campaigns represented the typical pattern for career archers, maintaining family connections and civilian identity despite extended absences, creating the complex dual existence that characterized medieval military service before standing armies became normative. The most significant military engagement of Hugh's later career came at the Battle of Poitiers, 1356, where English forces under the Black Prince achieved another decisive victory, despite numerical disadvantage. Payment records confirm Hugh's presence with archer units that held the defensive positions from which disciplined volleys systematically disrupted French advances. Now in his mid-30s, relatively old for an active archer given the physical demands of the heavy warbow, his experience would have proved particularly valuable in maintaining younger archers. Discipline during initial enemy approaches. A fascinating personal artifact from this period survived through family preservation. A small wooden medallion carved during evening hours in camp, depicting a simplified archer figure drawing a bow. The reverse bears the inscription, "Hugh to Thomas, draw straight, shoot true," in crude Latin lettering, apparently intended as a gift for his eldest son. This rare personal object humanizes the professional archer, suggesting conscious effort to connect his martial identity to family legacy despite prolonged separation. The final military record of Hugh's service appears in discharge papers dated 1360, following the Treaty of Bretigny that temporarily halted major hostilities between England and France. Listed as archer, veteran of multiple campaigns, honorably discharged with commendation, he received final payment including a modest bonus of 20 shillings, approximately 3 months' wages for an agricultural labourer of the period. Hugh's return to civilian life appears in fragmented records from his home region. Local tax assessments from 1362 list him as possessing a small holding of land beyond what his father had owned, suggesting either inheritance or purchase using accumulated military pay. His name appears in court records from 1365 regarding boundary disputes with neighbouring landholders, the mundane legal concerns of civilian existence replacing the stark imperatives of campaign life. More poignantly, parish records note his participation in the training of local youth at the archery butts, specifically receiving small payment from community funds for instruction of young men in the proper draw and loose and tactics of field archery. This transmission of hard-earned martial knowledge to subsequent generations represented common practice among veterans, ensuring that accumulated experience survived beyond individual careers. The physical toll of archery manifested in Hugh's later years. A physician's account from 1370 briefly describes treating the archer Staunton for great pain in the drawing shoulder and deformity of the fingers such that they cannot straighten fully. These symptoms represent the typical degenerative conditions documented in skeletal remains of career archers. The delayed payment for decades of drawing weights exceeding 100 pounds. The last definitive record of Hugh appears in his will, dated 1376, when he would have been approximately 56 years old, a respectable age for the period, particularly given the physical demands and risks of his military career. His bequests include my best bow to my son Thomas, my second bow to the church for the youth practice, and my arrow-making tools to my younger son William. His burial in the local churchyard was noted in parish records with the simple epitaph, Archer to the King, an acknowledgement of professional identity maintained even in death. Hugh's descendants maintained the family's archery tradition for at least 2 additional generations. Muster rolls from the resumed hostilities of the late 14th century list both Thomas and William de Staunton as archers in royal service, suggesting direct transmission of both skills and professional connection. A 3rd generation appears in early 15th century records, with Hugh's grandson Richard serving as an archer at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, completing a family military tradition spanning nearly 80 years across 3 generations. This generational continuity reflects the broader pattern of archery as hereditary profession throughout the longbow's dominance of English military tactics, skills transferred from father to son, equipment passed as valued inheritance, professional connections maintained across generations, creating lineages of specialized military service that paralleled but remained distinct from the more visible, noble martial traditions. As darkness deepens and sleep approaches, consider how Hugh's individual experience, reconstructed from fragmentary evidence across ordinary records, multiplied across thousands of similar lives, formed the foundation of English military capability through a critical historical period. Each arrow loosed at Crécy, Poitiers, or Agincourt represented not merely a projectile, but the culmination of lifetime training, generational knowledge transfer, and specialized physical development. The human infrastructure underlying technological advantage. The past speaks to us in whispers, through fragments and artifacts, but sometimes history shouts across the centuries with startling clarity. Such is the case with the Mary Rose, Henry VIII's magnificent warship that slipped beneath the waves in 1545, taking with her the stories of hundreds of souls, including the ship's company of archers. As you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine the cool, dark waters of the Solent, just off Portsmouth's coast. For over 4 centuries, this Tudor time capsule lay preserved in the silty embrace of the seabed. When she was raised in 1982, the Mary Rose didn't just bring up timbers and treasures. She brought up lives, frozen in their final moments, waiting to tell their tales. Among the most remarkable discoveries were 137 longbows, still intact, still bearing the marks of their maker's hands. Think about that for a moment. Objects of wood that survived submersion for nearly half a millennium. These weren't just any bows. They were weapons of war, averaging 6 feet in length, with draw weights ranging from 100 to 185 pounds. Modern archers, with all our technological advantages, would struggle to draw even the lightest of these formidable weapons. When researchers crafted replicas based on these findings, they discovered that the arrows could penetrate standard plate armor at 200 yards. No wonder England's enemies spoke of arrow storms with such terror. But perhaps the most poignant discoveries were the skeletal remains of the archers themselves. Their bones tell stories more honest than any chronicle or poem. These men's bodies had been physically transformed by their profession, molded by thousands upon thousands of hours of repetitive strain. Their spines curved slightly to one side. Their left arms, the ones that held the massive bows steady, showed thickened bone structure and enlarged attachment points where powerful muscles once anchored. Their right shoulder blades were distorted from the repeated drawing motion of the bowstring. Some skeletons revealed osteophytes, painful bone spurs that had formed along their spines, the eventual price paid for a lifetime of service. One archer, estimated to have been in his early 20s, already showed significant skeletal adaptations. His spine had begun to twist, his shoulder joints enlarged. How many arrows had he loosed in his short life to have rewritten his very skeleton? 10,000? 100,000? We will never know his name or hear his voice, but his bones speak volumes about dedication, suffering, and duty. Among the personal items recovered were leather wrist guards, stiffened and darkened by centuries, underwater, but still recognizable. Imagine the young man who once wore this bracer, adjusting it each morning before taking up his position on the gun deck. Was he nervous that day in 1545, knowing the French fleet approached? Did he think of home as he prepared his arrows? Did he have a sweetheart waiting in Portsmouth? These intimate objects transform statistics into people, not just Tudor archers, but individuals with hopes, fears, and everyday concerns much like our own. The ship also yielded dozens of arrow spacers, simple wooden discs with holes drilled through them that archers would use to keep their arrows organized and accessible during battle. Each spacer typically held 24 arrows, ready to be drawn in quick succession. Imagine the rhythmic motion. Draw, loose, reach, draw, loose, reach. A disciplined archer could maintain this deadly cadence for remarkable periods, becoming almost mechanical in his precision. One particularly touching find was a small wooden chest containing the personal effects of what archaeologists believe was one of the ship's archers. Inside were spare bowstrings, carefully wrapped in waxed cloth to protect them from moisture, a small knife for whittling arrow shafts, a bone comb, and a wooden medallion carved with the likeness of Saint Sebastian, the patron saint of archers. The owner never returned to claim these treasures. They remained exactly as he left them on that July morning, when the Mary Rose heeled too far while turning and water rushed in through her open gun ports. The efficiency of these Tudor archers was staggering. Historical records suggest that a skilled bowman could loose between 10 and 12 arrows per minute, each capable of killing at 200 yards or more. With around 200 archers aboard the Mary Rose, they could theoretically unleash over 2,000 projectiles every 60 seconds. Imagine standing on an enemy vessel, watching that deadly cloud rise and then descend toward you. The psychological impact alone would be devastating. Yet for all their deadly skill, these men were still human. Among the personal effects were gaming dice, a small wooden flute, and numerous leather flasks that once held ale or water. During long hours at sea, between drills and battles, they played games, made music, drank, and gossiped, just as sailors have always done. The arrows themselves reveal another layer of craftsmanship. Some still had their fletchings intact. Goose feathers, precisely trimmed and aligned to stabilize flight. Others showed the distinctive spiral pattern where the fletching had once been attached with glue and fine thread. The arrowheads varied. Some were bodkin points designed to puncture armor, while others were broadheads meant to cause massive trauma to unarmored targets. Each type represented a tactical choice, a specific answer to a battlefield question. Perhaps most haunting of all the Mary Rose discoveries was a half-finished arrow found in what archaeologists identified as the carpenter's cabin. The shaft was shaped, the nock cut, but no fletching or point had yet been attached. Work interrupted, a life interrupted. The carpenter, perhaps doubling as a fletcher during battle preparations, never returned to complete his task. As the artifacts from the Mary Rose were carefully catalogued and preserved, researchers noticed something else about the archers' remains. Their teeth often showed distinctive notches and wear patterns, suggesting they had used their teeth as tools in their archery practice, perhaps to help tighten bowstrings or hold arrows while working. These small, intimate details remind us that history isn't just about grand battles and kings. It's about how ordinary people lived, worked, and adapted to the demands of their world. The Mary Rose archers weren't historical abstractions. They were men with calloused hands and aching shoulders who boarded their ship on a summer morning, never suspecting they would become the most thoroughly documented medieval archers in history. Men who chewed their fingernails, who carved their initials into their arrow spacers, who carried lucky charms into battle. Men whose final moments came not from enemy fire, but from a tragic accident, a ship heeling too far, unable to recover, sending them into the depths where they would rest until modern hands carefully raised them back into the light. As you drift towards sleep, imagine these archers, not as warriors from dusty history books, but as men much like any others, setting sail that fateful morning, the July sun warming their faces, unaware that they were sailing not just toward the French fleet, but toward immortality of a kind they could never have imagined. Their legacy lives on, not in victory monuments or heroic songs, but in their quiet testimony of bone and wood and leather, whispering secrets across the centuries to anyone patient enough to listen. Let your mind drift now to a misty October morning in 1415. The fields near the small village of Agincourt, France, are churned into thick mud from days of autumn rain. In the grey pre-dawn light, thousands of men prepare for what will become one of history's most famous battles. Among them is a figure we'll never truly know. An English archer we'll call Thomas, though his real name is lost to history. Thomas doesn't know he's about to participate in a battle that will be remembered for centuries. He knows only that he's tired, his feet are wet and blistered from weeks of marching, and his stomach aches with hunger. The English army has been on the move through hostile territory, their numbers dwindling from disease and harassment. Now they face a French force that outnumbers them significantly, perhaps 5-1, according to some chronicles. Imagine Thomas now, 26 years old, a veteran of other campaigns, standing with his fellow archers at the edge of a recently ploughed field. He has slept poorly on the damp ground, waking intermittently to the sounds of the massive French camp across the field, horses nickering, armour being readied, the low murmur of thousands of voices. Now, in the strengthening light, he can see the enemy arranging themselves into battle formation, their polished armour catching the first rays of sunrise, bright spots of light in the misty landscape. Thomas and his fellow archers have been positioned on the flanks of the English formation, where the field narrows between two areas of dense woodland. King Henry V, a man Thomas has glimpsed only from a distance, has chosen the ground carefully. The narrowing field will bunch the French forces, limiting their ability to spread out and envelop the smaller English army. Thomas doesn't understand the full strategy, but he knows his role: to shoot and keep shooting until his arrows are gone or the battle is decided. He carries a personal supply of around 24 arrows in his belt quiver. Additional stocks are piled behind the lines, thousands of arrows bundled together, their grey goose feathers slightly ruffled by the damp morning breeze. Each arrow represents hours of careful craftsmanship, but Thomas thinks of them now as simply tools. He runs his calloused fingers over his bowstring one last time, checking for fraying or wetness. Despite the damp conditions, he's kept it protected overnight. wrapped in waxed cloth and stored inside his leather jerkin, close to his body's warmth. His bow, the product of years of practice, the extension of his will, feels alive in his hand. 6 feet of seasoned yew, it has served him through 3 campaigns. He knows its personality, how it flexes slightly differently in cold weather, how the lower limb has a barely perceptible twist that he compensates for instinctively when aiming. Thomas doesn't think of his bow as a weapon, but as a companion, perhaps the most reliable one he's ever had. The French knights are assembling now in their gleaming array, banners catching the breeze. Thomas feels a familiar tightening in his chest. Not exactly fear, though fear is certainly present, but a strange, focused clarity. Time seems to slow. The smell of mud and sweat and wood smoke from breakfast fires fills his nostrils. The weight of his padded jacket, the pressure of his bow against his palm, the dull ache in his lower back from sleeping on cold ground, all sensations become heightened. On command, Thomas and thousands of his fellow archers advance beyond the English. Men-at-arms. They drive sharpened stakes into the ground before them, a simple but effective barrier against cavalry charges. Then, with practiced motions, they begin to loose their arrows high into the air, creating that deadly rain that has become England's signature in warfare. The first volley arcs upward, 10,000 arrows darkening the sky momentarily before descending upon the still organizing French vanguard. Thomas doesn't wait to see where his particular arrow lands. He's already reaching for his second shaft, knocking, drawing, loosing in one fluid motion that his body remembers better than his mind. Draw to the ear, elbow high, release with a breath. Techniques drilled into him since childhood. The French begin their advance, and the rhythm of Thomas's shooting changes. No longer are they simply creating an arrow storm. Now they're targeting specific threats. A knight whose visor is raised. A horse whose barding doesn't quite cover its chest. The gaps in armor at the joints, armpit, knee, groin. Thomas doesn't think consciously about these targets. His body chooses them through years of training, the way a musician's fingers find notes without conscious thought. The mud proves to be an unexpected English ally. The heavily armored French knights, already struggling under 60 pounds of steel, plate, find themselves slipping, their movements slowed to a desperate trudge. Some fall and cannot rise without assistance, becoming perfect targets. Others bunch together in the narrowing field, creating a dense mass of humanity against which it becomes almost impossible to miss. Thomas looses arrow after arrow. His world narrows to this repetitive action. Draw, aim, loose, reach, draw again. His shoulders burn with the effort of pulling the heavy bow hundreds of times. The string cuts into his fingers despite their calloused protection. At some point, he can't remember when, a French crossbowman's bolt grazed his left thigh, leaving a stinging cut, but he barely noticed in the moment. When his personal supply of arrows is exhausted, he makes his way to the communal piles behind the lines, grabbing another bundle before returning to his position. The battle has transformed now. The French knights, those who have managed to cross the field of fire, engage with the English men-at-arms in desperate hand-to-hand combat. Thomas switches to his secondary weapon, a short malice, halfway between a mallet and a pickaxe, and joins the melee. The fighting becomes desperate, chaotic. Thomas finds himself face to face with a French man-at-arms whose fine armor marks him as nobility, but fine armor offers little advantage in the churning mud. The French noble slips, and Thomas brings his malice down through the gap between helmet and breastplate. He feels no triumph, only grim determination to survive another moment, another hour. When the battle finally ends, Thomas stands among the living, though he doesn't immediately comprehend the scale of what has happened. The English victory is not merely decisive, it is historically lopsided. French casualties number in the thousands, including many of France's highest nobility. English. Losses are comparatively light, measured in the hundreds. As dusk falls over the battlefield, Thomas helps gather arrows that can be salvaged from the dead and the mud. Even in victory, practicality prevails. Each arrow is valuable, worth recovering if possible. His hands perform this task automatically, while his mind remains somewhere else entirely, not quite able to process the day's events. Later, as he sits beside a small fire with his surviving companions, sharing a meager portion of bread and dried meat, Thomas doesn't know that he has participated in a battle that will define English military prowess for generations. He doesn't know that centuries later, Shakespeare will immortalize this day, or that the longbow will become synonymous with English identity. He knows only that he is alive when many are not, that his shoulder aches from drawing his bow hundreds of times, and that tomorrow they will march again. In the flickering firelight, Thomas examines his bow, checking for cracks or damage. This simple tool, this piece of shaped yew, has transformed the nature of warfare. It has made him, a common-born man of no particular status, into a threat that even the highest-born, best-equipped knight must fear. In a world rigidly defined by birth and class, the longbow is a rare equalizer. As you drift between wakefulness and dreams, consider how Thomas and thousands like him, these ordinary men with extraordinary skills, shaped history not through individual heroism, but through disciplined collective action. The anonymous archer, standing in the rain and mud, drawing his bow time after time until his shoulders scream in protest, changed the course of nations as surely as any crowned king. And now, as your breathing deepens and your thoughts begin to slow, you drift back to your own bed, your own time. Perhaps your fingers flex unconsciously, remembering a bowstring you never actually pulled. Perhaps your shoulder carries a phantom ache from a quiver you never bore. The boundaries between now and then, between your reality and theirs, grow, pleasantly blurred as sleep approaches. These medieval archers, men whose names are mostly lost to us, have left their mark not just on history, but on the very concept of dedication. What does it mean to commit so fully to a single skill that it reshapes your body? We speak of muscle memory casually today, but these archers embodied it completely. Their skeletons literally reformed around their practice until they became living weapons, their bodies inseparable from their craft. In our modern world, we rarely encounter such physical transformation through specialization. Yes, we have our athletes, our craftspeople, our musicians, all of whom reshape their bodies. Through repetitive practice, the ballerina's feet, the guitarist's fingertips, the glassblower's lungs, all bear witness to years of dedicated effort. But the medieval archer represents something more absolute, more consuming. From childhood to grave, the bow was not just a tool, but an identity, a destiny written in developing bone and sinew. What might it have been like to possess a skill so essential to your nation's survival? To know that your ability to draw a bow, a simple mechanical action, could determine the fate of kingdoms. There is both power and burden in such knowledge. The archers at Crécy, at Poitiers, at Agincourt carried this understanding with them, this awareness that their calloused fingers held history's threads. Think of how differently they must have perceived their bodies compared to how we see ours. For us, physical discomfort often signals something wrong, something to be remedied or avoided. For them, the aches, the strains, the slow distortion of spine and shoulder were simply the expected cost of their profession. Pain wasn't an alarm, but a companion, as familiar as the weight of the bow in hand or the sound of the bowstring's release. The medieval archer reminds us that humans are remarkably adaptable creatures. Place demands upon the body, and it will respond, reshaping itself to meet those demands, finding new equilibriums, new ways of being. This plasticity, this capacity for change, remains one of our most remarkable qualities. the archers transformed. Skeleton bears witness to our ability to become what circumstances require of us. Perhaps there's something both comforting and unsettling in this knowledge. Comforting because it speaks to our resilience, our capacity to meet challenges and overcome them. Unsettling because it reminds us how thoroughly we can be changed by the demands placed upon us, how the work we do inevitably works upon us in return. As sleep draws nearer, consider the archer's paradox, that curious physics phenomenon where an arrow must flex around the bow to fly true. The arrow bends, absorbing the forward force of the string, and in that bending finds its proper path. Perhaps there's wisdom here for our own lives. Sometimes we too must bend rather than break, must absorb pressure rather than resist it, must find our path through flexibility rather than rigidity. The medieval archer has vanished from our world. The skills that once secured England's borders and defined its military power have largely been lost, preserved only in historical reenactments and specialized hobbyists. But perhaps something of their spirit remains. In our Olympic athletes, in our artisans, in anyone who dedicates themselves so completely to a practice that it becomes inseparable from their identity. The next time you encounter someone whose body bears witness to their life's work, a carpenter's hands, a dancer's posture, a surgeon's precise control, remember the archers of medieval England, whose bodies became living testaments to their craft. Remember that dedication leaves its marks upon us, visible and invisible, and that these marks tell our stories sometimes more honestly than words ever could. And now, as your consciousness begins to drift like an arrow in gentle flight, remember that you too are being shaped by your choices, your habits, your daily actions. Not as drastically as those medieval bowmen perhaps, but shaped nonetheless into something unique and particular. What marks are you choosing to carry? What story is your life writing upon you? Let these thoughts gentle into dreams as you slip away from wakefulness. Imagine once more the sound of a bowstring's release, that distinctive musical thrum that falls somewhere between a note and a whisper. Let it be the last sound that follows you into sleep, a sound that once meant danger but now signals only peace, only rest, only the release of conscious thought into the welcoming dark. Sleep well, dream deeply, and perhaps somewhere in those dreams, you might knock an arrow to an ancient bow, feel the yew flex beneath your grip, and understand, if only for a moment, what it meant to be part of that brotherhood of the bow, that company of ordinary men whose extraordinary skill shaped the course of nations and whose legacy endures in bone and story and silent woodland yew. Good night.